Welcome everybody. Sorry we're a little bit late, but we just had a few technical difficulties there getting ourselves going. But we are back again with another NMRAx after a week of NERX. And I'm Gordy. If you don't know, you should know who I am by now. I mean, 3 years down the line, we should know who Gordy is. But anyway, I'm hosting this morning. And it's topic close to my heart, of course, O scale, where I started in the hobby, very first scale that Gordy did. So the first clinic today is all about O scale, and we're joined by two very important people in the O scale world. We've got the president of O scale Central, also a past national director of the board of directors of the Nickel Plate Historical and Technical Society. He's also the managing director of the Rail Ventures Maryland LLC, owner of Nickel Plate 151 City of Chicago, owner of Wit and Wisdom Models, um, which makes craftsman kits, a member of several historical societies, as well as a sustaining member of the NMRA. So we welcome David Vaughn. We're also joined by Nick, who as well as playing the trombone professionally, is a proud Baltimore and Ohio O-Scale 2-rail modeler. He is the past secretary and present board member of the O-Scale Central Group and a member of the Baltimore and Ohio Historical Society. Both of these gentlemen are NMRA members and participate in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. O-Scale Round Robin Group. So please welcome David and Nick.
Thank you, Gordy. I want to thank Speed and Gordy and the NMRA for the opportunity to appear on NMRAx. We are always happy to promote O-Scale. We are happy to work with NMRA and have been enjoying a very positive relationship. O-Scale Central, of which I'm president, is the special interest group for O-Scale within NMRA, and we much appreciate the opportunity. The purpose of this clinic is to describe O-Scale 2-rail, suggest why you as modelers should consider adding O-Scale 2-rail to your modeling palette or even to make it your primary scale, and to educate you on how to explore and get started in O-Scale 2-rail, should you choose to do that. By way of background, I am an O-Scale 2-rail modeler. We shortcut that term sometime as calling it OS2R. I was in HO and NN, and I have to say, putting in a shameless plug, that OS2R is by far the most satisfying scale that I have worked in. Many modelers start in other scales and gravitate to OS2R, and I think that opinion, that is that it's very satisfying, is something that is pretty well universal among OS2R modelers. OS2R and O-Scale refers to models that are built in 1/4 inch to the foot, 1/48 the full size. OS2R is approximately twice the scale of HO, but has approximately 8 times the mass. This significant increase in size means that detail is more visible, the models are easier to work with, and have more mass, more heft than smaller scales. That can translate into not only better visuals, and a different relationship with the models, but also to improved operation. OS2R has a long history. OS2R models have been manufactured for over a century, and actually up through World War II, O-Scale modelers were a major percentage of the model railroading hobby. After World War II and continuing into today, HO became the most dominant scale and has largely eclipsed OS2R. Indeed, going back to the origin, the organization of NMRA was itself in substantial part the result of several of the larger O-Scale clubs in the 1930s seeking to develop common standards. And much of the leadership of NMRA over time, including Gordy's own leadership, has been by O-scale modelers. So we have always been active participants in NMRA, and happy to try and lead by example. When most people today think of O-scale, they visualize Lionel and MTH, three-rail product lines, and all except the very tops of which are suffer from compromised dimensions, oversized trucks and couplers, and unrealistic tracks and curves. Uh, it is true that the track gauge, the distance between the rails for Lionel and MTH, is the same as for O-scale. To say that there are compromises is not a knock on Lionel. Many modelers started in three-rail as kids, and there remains a great deal of play value in three-rail equipment and layouts. But the limitations of three-rail, beginning with that pesky third rail right down the middle, are hard to get past, and harder to get past as modelers become more sophisticated and have higher expectations of the fidelity of the models that they build and operate. Two-rail O-scale, OS2R, is not only 1 to 48 quarter-inch to the foot models, but the hallmarks are our models are in full scale, generally built from blueprints. We use two-rail track and DC or DCC power, same as HO. While the size of O-scale two-rail as a percentage of the hobby has certainly declined over time, it still remains approximately 2% of the model railroad hobby. However, since OS2R is not generally stocked by local hobby shops, if you can find one, or treated very well in magazines, catalogs, or even online forum, there is a great shortage of information about OS2R, and because of that low visibility, many modelers are not familiar with the scale and what it's offered. In fact, you may never have seen OS2R models and layouts. Our task today is to start to fill that gap and tell you why OS2R merits consideration in your hobby's future as your horizons expand, your eyesight gets fuzzier, and you start looking for new challenges as the scale and modeling that you're in might become passe, and you may need newer challenges. So, why model in OS2R? I mentioned before the fidelity of detail, the size and heft of the models. As you can see from the models on the screen, it is practical. These are all O-scale models, not full size, and it is practical to build into your hobby an ongoing set of are those photographs real, or are they models? The details are obviously larger and easier to see even at a distance. The models are easier to work with and build and detail. The mass, as indicated, facilitates reliable and satisfying operation. And even the off-the-shelf or out-of-the-box models tend to have higher levels of detail. And as I said, the size makes it easier to add more. Every scale is, of course, a compromise with the real models. We think O-scale represents a very viable compromise. It's easy to scratch build or kit bash in O-scale. There are no special scale rulers that are needed. There are plenty of manufacturers producing kits and parts. O-scale tends to be a builder's scale, and the results, as you can see, uh, give high levels of detail and approximate full time. You can do models that make you scratch your head on whether it's a model or real in virtually any scale, but it is certainly easier and more straightforward in O. For people who are looking for a first scale who have not previously been in modeling, it's important to rebut some of the myths about O scale. The first is that O scale is significantly more expensive. If you look on eBay or look in catalogs, you will find that that is not the case. And because the area is larger, the actual cost per square foot, which is one way to measure cost, is the same or lower than the larger scales. For people who are looking for that first scale, we will say, and Nick will talk more about this later, there is a very close knit O-scale two-rail community that provides resources and support to get you started. For people who are considering O-scale, who are presently HO or N-scale modelers or three-rail modelers, those scales are getting expensive, and as indicated, the models are almost the same in cost between the scales, particularly at the higher ends. And as indicated, O-scale is a friendly and advanced craftsman platform that you can work with. For people coming from three-rail, obviously we think the realism is significantly higher than in three-rail. You start by losing the third rail. The trucks and couplers are scale or much closer to it. The locomotives and cars are more detailed. And in fact, if you are working at the higher end in O-scale three-rail, some of the equipment that you have may very easily be converted to two-rail, changing only the trucks and couplers. There are a number of options in working in O-scale two-rail. The traditional O-scale two-rail gauge works out to be 5 feet instead of the standard 4 foot 8.5. There are some historical accidents. We like to blame the Brits and their 7mm O-scale for that, but clearly we could have done more over the years. Most of the equipment in O-scale, particularly that you would buy off the shelf and take out of the box, is in this traditional O-scale. It is very, very close to full scale, but as in any scale, including HO, there are people who strive for a higher level of fidelity in O-scale that is called Proto 48. The gauge in O-scale is actually 4 foot 8.5. The tolerances in terms of wheel width and a few other dimensions are closer to the prototype, but the difference in terms of simply looking at a layout or building a model are relatively slight. For some people, that slight difference makes a great deal of difference, and they go for the higher detail. But you can get through your hobby perfectly well with traditional O-scale, or you can start with a very high level of fidelity and go directly into Proto 48. We have the usual uh, variety of narrow gauge modeling in O scale. Uh, and we have the advantage that O scale narrow gauge has larger boilers, easier to install electronics, better boilers, better transmissions. And we have, in addition to the traditional ON3, ON2, ON18, we have ON30, which is a largely uh, proto freelanced scale between ON3 and ON2, which runs on HO scale tracks. So if you are concerned about excess radius in O scale, you can actually use HO scale components and HO scale mechanisms in addition to those that are produced by manufacturers to get a very satisfying proto freelance narrow gauge experience. The overall flavor of O scale is one that is not only supported by 100 years of modeling and models, but by a very active support environment from clubs, from from modular layout groups, and an entire network of support. Nick Bulgarino is going to talk about how to actually get started in O scale, how to do the exploration, what resources there are to assist modelers. We encourage you to explore. You don't have to give up your present scale to do that. And Nick is going to tell you how to do it.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. My name is Nick Bulgarino. I am the previously mentioned trombonist slash model railroader. And today I'm going to show you how to get started in O scale. So I recently just got into the scale. 2019 is when I started first buying my models. And I started by coming to O Scale Central. The organization was under a different name at the time, but I kind of started there at one of the train shows. So just a quick recap, O Scale Central is the NMRA SIG for 2 Rail O. It is a membership organization that promotes the hobby as well as supports the current O Scale 2 Rail modelers. It provides a number of free resources to help you get started in the scale, including the product and service guide, which has over 200 entries for people who make products and provide services for modelers in the scale. So, what I'd like to do today, and if you want to follow along at home, you can. I'm going to take you to our website, oscalecentral.com, not .gov, not .edu, not .org, just .com. And we're going to go through some of the resources that we have available for you. One of the biggest strengths of O Scale as a community is how friendly and welcoming everybody is to anybody of any modeling experience. And when I first got in the scale, I was in college. I had very little to no modeling experience. So what I did is I came here for newcomers, right? Anyone who's just getting started in the scale. We have a number of articles that show off what this community of modelers is and how to get started. The difference between gauge and scale, which we kind of touched on earlier, switching from 3 rail to 2 rail, which is a popular topic for those who are interested a little bit more in depth on the track gauges, the different sub communities within O. But what I want to do is take you guys here first to the online forums and groups. This is the easiest place, at least in my opinion, to get started kind of exploring. Oh, you see people talking about their models, where they got them, posting pictures, talking about certain modeling techniques, which is really what this hobby is about. Um, and there are a number of Facebook groups, a number of independent forums, Groups.io. For those of you who are familiar with Yahoo Groups, Groups.io is kind of the newer version of that. So this is a good place, in my opinion, to start. For those who want to start actually procuring models, purchasing them, working on them, and building in the scale, O scale is a little bit different than other scales. David mentioned we don't really have that retail hobby shop presence that the other scales have. So what we have done at O Scale Central is created this product and service guide. Now I'm going to take you straight into the guide here. There is a little tutorial page, but anything you see here, anything you're looking for is available here. I'll just take you into motive power just for fun. We have manufacturers of ready-to-run models as well as kits. David mentioned the myths of O scale earlier, and one of the myths that I don't know where this came from is that you have to build everything yourself in O. Not true. There are a number of manufacturers that make ready-to-run models. Another thing to be aware of is the secondary market. We have a guide here talking about that. The secondary market, more or less, has on it everything that you need in the scale. Let me go back here and I'll show you one of the best ways you can access that secondary market. But not products. I want to go just back to the page here. Is seeing our upcoming events. Now, where did we put the events? Getting started. Let me go back to O Scale Central here, or O Scale Info. O Scale Info is the sister site that actually hosts the guide. So under Find O Scale, we have OS2R events, and this is a calendar of events that are upcoming. We just had the Chicago meet. That's our big O scale show that's out in Chicago. All of the information is here. Other upcoming events include the Central Indiana Division meet, which is an NMRA partnership meet. And that's what we have here for O Scale Central and getting started in O. I encourage you to go check out the links on the website. That's the best way to kind of get started. You can also contact us at O Scale Central. Let me go back here really quick, pull up the PowerPoint. You can also contact us by going to the Contact Us tab here. All right, let's back out of this and get back to the PowerPoint slide. Of the resources that O Scale has, we have a number of O Scale magazines. O Scale Resource, which is linked on the website here. That is a free magazine, free to read, is available at oscaleresource.com. O Scale Trains is our print magazine. You can find it online. It's White River, one of the White River Productions magazines. You can subscribe to it online or purchase a copy at your local Barnes and Noble. And that's all I have to say about getting started. If you have any questions, I guess there's going to be a Q&A at the end of this, and you can also contact us through oscalecentral.com. David, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Okay, thank you. By way of follow-up, we've talked about the supportive O Scale community, and there's nothing magic about it, but we are a small group relative to the other hobbies. We tend to know each other. We are very accepting of new folks, and like any other community, When people need help, we pitch in and help. You'll see up there on the screen a work party that we did when one of our members had to take down a layout for health reasons. Um, we understand that for many people, O-scale 2-rail is going to be think of it as a second modeling career. You may start with Lionel as a kid. You may start in HO or N as a newer modeler. But we think that there will eventually come a time when, for all the reasons that we've talked about, O-scale 2-rail will be appealing, will be on your radar. And when it is, it's easy to access. I don't know whether Nick hit appropriately thoroughly, I should say, the large amount of social media that is out there. O-scale 2-rail modelers are Facebook participants. They have blogs. You can find almost anything you want online as specific as you need or as general as you need on getting started. The secondary market does play a much larger role in O-scale than it does in many other scales because there is so much equipment that's already out there. There is a lot of what we call new old stock. There are lots of used equipment that is available through eBay. There are various other sales platforms like O-scale Yard Sale and others that you can go to. On the top left of the screen that you're seeing is a photograph of the Chicago 2-rail O-scale show that was held just last weekend. And we had 350 tables, I think, and a proportionate number of attendees. You can find everything you want by way of hardware going to these shows, and you can find an entry into the O-scale community there as well. Similar shows which are on the list of coming events at O-scale Central can be found on the West Coast, can be found in New England, can be found in the Southwest, and provide a real entry point. And these are O-scale specific shows. You can also go to all scale shows and find a presence there of O-scale 2-rail modeling. That's our presentation. We want to hear from the audience the questions and concerns that you might have, and we'll try and answer them. Back to you, Speed.
Oh yeah, the convention.
Thank you. We have an O-scale national convention. Like every other gathering, it has taken its lumps over the last several years with COVID, and we are still feeling our way along coming back. But the O-scale national convention is going to be in Denver, actually Aurora, Colorado. It is going to be June 8 through 11. If you've never done rail fanning in Colorado, there are multiple reasons to go to Colorado to supplement the O-scale convention and make it worth the time and effort that it takes to get there. The O-scale National Convention is home ported at oscalenational.com, all one word, oscalenational.com. that will tell you how to register. It will tell you more about the program. It will give you the hotel information. One of the things I can tell you already is that our banquet speaker in Denver is going to be Ed Dickens. And Ed Dickens, who may not necessarily be a household word, but Ed Dickens is in charge of the Union Pacific STEAM program. So he is Mr. UP 4014, and he is a very knowledgeable guy. He really has put together not only a great team to handle the restorations and operation of the Union Pacific steam locomotives, but he also has put together a really informative and entertaining presentation. So he would be worth it coming to Denver almost on his own, but it is going to be the capstone of a good, solid program of clinics, of layout tours, and of course a trading hall. It will also be a good opportunity to meet and become familiar with the O-scale community. There are lots of opportunities for chats in the hall and for social activities. So we encourage the people who are considering changing, as well as those who are already O-scale 2-rail modelers, to join us in Denver.
That's great. Thanks, David. Nick, I don't know if you want to just stop your screen share so that people can see us a bit bigger on the screen there, while we do some questions, if that's okay with you guys.
Well, I don't know whether I'm ready to take down that beautiful photograph of the nickel plate caboose, but I guess we have to do it at some point.
All right, let's hit the question. So, we've got a question on here around the convention. So we'll hit that one first, and then we'll hit some O-scale questions because we've got plenty of time for questions. So the question is, why do you guys think each scale needs its own national convention? Why should scales not just hold their convention with the NMRA national, thinking that S scale, O scale, and N scale hold conventions separate from the NMRA? Why would you not just do it with the NMRA?
Well, that's a great question. Let me try that, and Nick may want to handle it as well. We have not only the satisfaction of having an O-scale 2-rail community, and we enjoy the opportunity to get together and to cover O-scale topics. But most, if not all, of the convention clinics that we will be putting on will be O-scale specific, and it is simply it dilutes the clinic experience, and as well as like the model contests and as well as the layouts. If we go too far into having multiple scales, we're not opposed to working with other scales. We do it all the time, but we do feel the need to be with our own peeps.
To build on that, I think a more direct answer to the question comes down to visibility. We have participated with the NMRA National before. In fact, last year we sent a layout to the NMRA National. But O-scale, like David said earlier, we're only about 2% of the hobby. Part of the mission of the SIG is to grow the scale, and we believe that a good way of doing that is to have a convention that kind of celebrates our scale and its history and the modelers in it, and talk, like David said, more directly about topics that impact our modelers specifically.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. So moving on, more scale specific questions. So are there in the US currently ready to run good beginner models available for O scales for somebody getting into the scale?
Nick?
Sure, absolutely. The manufacturers that come to mind for me in terms of ready to run, this is a good first model. Sunset Third Rail, Atlas, and MTH. Those three companies produce two rail out of the box, ready to go models. Um, now, I got a brass model for my first model from a train show that I famously burnt down because I didn't understand model trains. But we can talk about that another time. But there are a number of models. Your best bet for looking for a model like that, go on eBay and talk with people on Facebook. That would be my advice if you're looking for a ready to run model out of the box.
And use the guide
Use the guide.
the one that Nick described and accessed.
Okay, so more questions. So I know here in the UK, we have a lot of smaller O scale layouts. Just this physically size of places that we've got lends itself to that, and the models are a little bit smaller than they are in the US. But is it possible for somebody that's getting into this is O scale 2 rail or thinking about O scale 2 rail as a second scale to be able to build a layout that's small enough to be good for operations?
Sure.
Absolutely. Or go ahead, David.
Sure. First of all, if you need size and want to run your big boy, there are club layouts, and clubs are important places to exercise your stable of locomotives and satisfy the need to run long trains. But there are also shelf layouts. As you know from the British experience, that's almost an entire separate hobby. In O scale, it's advantageous to do that. You can certainly start with that and see where it leads you. It is also possible to participate in modular layouts. So you do not have to have an entire layout at home, but you can join a group and build and participate that way. Nick?
Just to expand on that, um, there are a number of time saver type layouts if you're looking for operations that way. A number of designs floating around out there. Some that come to mind. There's a group out in Chicago that has one you might find pictures of. The Baltimore Society of Model Engineers, which I am a member of that model railroad club. They also have a time saver, and they even put loops on it to run the local freight train, right? In the NMRA magazine that came out after the St. Louis convention, I believe we had an article in it that actually has the design of the layout based on Wingate, Indiana. And that is a good, it's a longer layout than your average time saver, but it's very good for operations. I would encourage you to check out that article. David, do you remember what issue that came out in?
It was after the convention, so it would have been in July or August, I believe. We also have an article that appeared in the NMRA magazine. We appreciate them giving us the space and the ink, called O Positive, the Case for O Scale, which was published in the May 2022 NMRA magazine. And the NMRA graciously gave us permission to reproduce that article for educational purposes, non-commercial purposes, and a link to download that article is in fact found on the O Scale Central website. So it has obviously more detail than what we can do in a short clinic. And anybody who is O Scale curious, we would encourage to go to the website, find that article, and use it as a resource. We've really been appreciative of NMRA for giving us that exposure. We intend to continue it. And in fact, there'll be an article coming up within the next 3 or 4 issues on O Scale Central as the NMRA SIG.
Cool, thanks guys. So one of the really important things for anyone getting into a new scale or thinking about getting into a new scale and trying to picture the size of it, because O scale 2 rail is not just a case of twice the size of HO, although technically it is, but it doesn't necessarily work out that way, is radii of curves and things. So what would be your advice to somebody in terms of radiuses of curves in standard gauge that they should be considering for O scale 2 rail?
Well, if you want to run your big boy on 27-inch radius curves, stay in 3-rail or stay in HO. There's no free lunch in life, and you can jury rig your cars to go around very sharp radius curves. They don't look real good, and they certainly don't feel very prototypical if you do that. Most people, if you think of of O scale 2 rail as being approximately 4 times the area, which would include the radius of curves, than HO. That gives you some idea of the curves that you're going to need. In the perfect world, on a main line to operate a big boy size locomotive, you really need probably 6-foot radius curves. There's no getting around that. But shorter wheelbases, smaller models fit very handily on smaller curves. Nick?
So to build off of that, the rule of thumb that I've been introduced to is 54-inch radius curves, which is the largest sectional curve that Atlas makes in 2-rail, will run about 80% of the engines out there that you could want. It'll fit anything from a smaller articulated all the way down to a switcher. What I've chosen to model in O scale at my home is the Pratt Street line, Baltimore and Ohio Pratt Street line. Really small switchers, really tight curves, lots of industry, because I'm a more operations minded kind of modeler. That's my appeal in the hobby. But David mentioned earlier that there are a number of clubs, and I should have mentioned this on the website. You can find under that Find O Scale tab, you will find clubs. That's where you can run the bigger locomotives, the triplexes, the big boys, the challengers, and not have them look like these trains with the 4-inch overhang going around curves that would fit on a 4-foot by 8-foot tabletop. But yeah, to adjust radius specifically, it just depends on the locomotive. I take the Armstrong approach to layout design whenever I'm doing a complete main line of design to the corners, design to the curves, and then work the main line around where you can put the circles in the room. But
okay, cool. So yeah, I was gonna say for UK stuff, and there's quite a lot of British O scale 2 rail with sound equipped locomotives from manufacturers that you can get into if you want to look across the pond for some stuff. There's quite a lot of affordable O scale models over the pond. Yeah, we use radiuses of 54 inches as a minimum radius, 4'6", and on my father's layout we use 7-foot and 9-foot radius curves on super elevation. It looks better when you're looking from the inside of the curve. Certainly, it looks a lot better when it's super elevated if you go on tighter on a radius. So cool. So a bit of your answer there, Nick, leads on to the next question, which was around O scale 2 rail on a 4x8 sheet, which gives me the giggles. And I suppose it's very doable to do an O scale 2 rail layout on a 4x8 sheet. It just isn't going to go around in a circle. So what do you guys think about 4-foot by 8-foot sheets as a starter?
well, actually, David, I'll kick this one to you to start. Isn't there a 4-foot by 8-foot Proto 48 layout that makes the rounds?
No, that's a
That's 8 by 16. That's 8 by 16.
8 by 16, I think. But
Sure.
uh, if you're using 4 foot by 8 foot in O scale 2 rail, you will need to work with smaller locomotives, shorter wheelbases, etc. It's not that you can't do it, and in fact, if you're operation oriented, it's quite practical to make a switching layout on there. But there are hidden options that you have. One of them is you can use ON30 to get started in O. You get the advantage of the larger scale and the easier working, and still be able to use basically HO scale curves. And you can also use O-scale traction, which gives you O-scale size with much smaller needs for big corners and big radius.
Cool. So, a lot of the stuff that you've shown us on your slides today, and a lot of the stuff that's on the O-Scale Central website, is very much transition era. So, what about somebody who's more of a modern era modeler getting into O-Scale 2 rail? What's available for them?
A lot. You're going to find a lot of brass diesels that are from the late 80s, early 90s, even up through the early 2000s. But a lot of the three rail modelers or the three rail model manufacturers. Like MTH and Atlas, they do make more modern locomotives and more modern rolling stock. Um, if you find them in their three rail versions, they're real easy to convert. A lot of the modern stuff is part of their higher end product line, which relative to HO and smaller scales, cost wise, is either the same or maybe just a little bit more. But these locomotives are real easy to swap out because you're only swapping the trucks. Same thing with the cars. And the cool thing in I not every HO model does this, but all the O scale models I've seen, the roller bearing caps actually roll.
And in addition to that, Atlas is bringing out right now, and they showed the pilot models in Chicago, a line of the Amtrak Challenger locomotives and the Amfleet cars. I model nickel plate, which went out of separate existence in the mid 60s. But in my fantasy, I have SD42s on the fiction that they never took over, and those are coming in along with a lot of other modern locomotives from Sunset Third Rail.
Yeah, quick correction. That's the Sunset that's bringing out the Amtrak Chargers.
No, it's Atlas.
I thought they ran out the
Sunset May 2, but Atlas had pilot models for. We obviously haven't rehearsed this part of our presentation, but there were Atlas pilot models for the Challengers in Chicago, along with the Amfleet cars. And there are other modern diesels coming from both Atlas and Sunset Third Rail, and probably other folks.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, that's great. So we mentioned earlier in the presentation about modular standards for O-Scale. So do you want to tell us a bit more about those modular standards for O-Scale 2 rail?
Sure. The short answer is, this is the modular standards have largely been balkanized. We keep talking about compelling standards. In point of fact, most groups that start modular layouts seem to have some variation of their own. We are working right now and have through the website a block where there's going to be a set of modular standards. The Detroit Model Railroad Club is already modeling to those standards and brought a modular layout to the Chicago show. So we are working with standards. This is a feel our way along situation. We're working with NMRA actually and trying to figure out where our standards fit with NMRA's. Hopefully they'll be compatible. Eric Peterson has been working primarily in that area.
Okay, so you're not adopting the Fremo O-Scale standards from Europe, then you're creating your own.
Help me on this, Nick. I'm not a modular guy. I haven't gotten my head around it, but Nick knows some, and there are other people in the organization that know more.
Yeah. So with the modular standards, one thing that we found is that each region, we have a set of construction details as they're called, but each region kind of has their own modular standard, and you just got to build to that standard if you're in the club area. Like for example, Baltimore Society of Model Engineers has its own modules. There's another group around here in Gettysburg that's building to a different modular standard, but they'll be interchangeable with a module that bridges the two standards. I think the only or one of the few standard clubs that are around, Detroit and the South Florida O-scalers, they have their modular standards. I know they're a little different, but that's the thing with O-scale. You find a community of modelers, you see what they're doing, and you get involved that way. So there's no universal standard like NMRAx yet, for example.
Okay, cool. So last question before we run out of time. Technologies for propulsion in O-scale. So what's the currently favored thing? DC, DCC, or is there some wireless technology or power on board? Where are things going in O-scale?
Nick is gonna jump on this power on board thing. But
yes, I am. I love battery power. But to answer your question, so right now, I think it would be fair to say the majority of O-scalers use DC, block DC. There are a significant portion of people and the clubs that do use DCC. NCE seems to be the standard. Soundtracks, TCS, all of the manufacturers make a 4 or 5 amp board that can run older O-scale locomotives and larger scale engines. One of the more exciting technologies developing for the larger scales, O-scale and higher, is power on board. I do power on board even in 040Ts. So it's possible to get the batteries and all the supporting electronics in there. Soundtracks just dropped Blue Nami, which is going to simplify a lot of the electronics even more. That is a Bluetooth wireless controller, or decoder rather, uses your phone. I use CVP AirWire, which is a separate radio controlled system. There's also Rail Pro, which I believe comes out of Australia, which is another one of those wireless control, can be track powered or battery powered systems. So there's a lot of exciting tech. That could be a clinic in its own right.
And the traditional model for O-scale is a motor about as big as your fist, and when you turn up the throttle, the street lights dim. But in point of fact, the modern CAN motors have a relatively low current draw and work very well with the DCC. I use NCE and a number of different decoders, including the 5 amp soundtracks. I would probably say for people who are new and active, DCC is more common than DC, particularly if you have a larger layout and or more locomotives.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, thank you both. That's us up to time. So thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have you back on another NMRAx to talk about your own modeling in a bit more detail rather than being more generic about O-scale. But thank you very much for coming along today.
Well, O-scale 2-rail is one of the best kept secrets in model railroading. We hope this clinic has shed some light on that, and we appreciate the opportunity that NMRA has afforded us. Thank you very much, Gordy and Speed.
Thank you. Thank
you both. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, so we'll carry on with today's program. We've got a couple of things coming up next. Before we get into the next little presentation, I just want to remind everyone that we are apparently talking to me after this next video. So if you've got questions for me that you want to ask me about the NMRA, about Gordy, about anything in general at all, then please pop them in the chat while you're watching the next video, and we'll pick them up when we're talking with me for 20 to 30 minutes after the video. Questions, it'll make it more interesting. But anyway, our next video is from the Colorado Model Railroad Museum director, who won the Governor's Outstanding Tourism Worker Award in 2015. So draw the lucky straw, and so they therefore drew the lucky straw to organize the 2023 Texas Express Rail Tours, which of course will be the NMRA National Convention in Dallas-Fort Worth at Grapevine, Texas in the summer. So since that is all that this person dreams about, please welcome Michelle Kempema with her vlog traveling to Grapevine a few weeks ago. Roll the tape.
Hey everybody, I'm starting my trip to Dallas and I just landed at Love Field, and Love Field is all Southwest, so if you're flying to a convention and you're flying Southwest, this is where you're going to land, and it's a nice airport, and we'll continue on our journey to convention. So something about Texas that those of us from Colorado don't know is they have Whataburger, and it's really good. Okay everybody, I came down here to the Union Tower, which is way up there, and I caught Amtrak before it left, and BNSF really long PSR train rolled through, a UP maintenance away rolled through, and now I'm here waiting on the Fort Worth TMP to leave, and you can see it right there over my shoulder. So this is definitely a place that is really fun to railfan, and it took me 15 minutes to drive here from Love Field. So if you're flying Southwest, you should definitely stop and railfan here before you move on. I am here at Dallas Union Station. It's a little windy. Here it is. It's a beautiful station, and this is going to be the first stop on the station's tour. You'll have a guided tour of the station, and then you'll get on TRE and go to Fort Worth. It looks like it's going to be really fun, and I just did a bunch of rail fanning here at the station, and it's great. Okay, one more thing I wanted to talk about for rail fanning is that Union Station's right there, and I'm at what's called the Union Tower, but the parking lot that's right behind me here is only $5, and I think it's on the east side. I'll have to look up a map, but it was only $5 to park here. Easy walk over to rail fan, easy to get in and out. So I just wanted to show that off. And right now, UP train's going by. Okay, so when you get off the plane at Love Field, you actually need to come here first. Discount Model Trains. It's right by the airport, and it's in this industrial building. You can see. Really fun place, really nice people. So I had a little detour and needed to go to a Macy's, but I found the Galleria Mall, which is actually really close to Discount Model Trains, and they have an ice skating rink in the basement. So if you get hot while you're at convention, you can come here and ice skate, and there's definitely a lot of shopping here. This is a huge mall. Hey everybody, look where I'm at.
Hey, train.
Grapevine! I gotta go see the train. Here we go. Grapevine Railroad today, and this is the first class service car. It's so pretty. So we're working with the Grapevine Railroad to do a special excursion just for the NMRA National Convention here in Grapevine. And so on Friday, you will be able to ride this train all the way to Fort Worth Stockyards, get off the train, enjoy the stockyards, see the cattle drive and all sorts of Western things, and then get back on this train and come back to Grapevine. So look for this tour. I think you're going to love it. I am so excited for this. It's going to be fun. Grapevine Railroad right now on a car, but I wanted you to see this shuttle right here. That is the Grapevine shuttle. So when you are at convention at the Gaylord, you can catch this shuttle right here, and you can go downtown Grapevine and have dinner. There's some amazing restaurants, there's wineries, there's everything. And that building right there is also a food hall. And so, just so you know, that's what the shuttle looks like. Okay everybody, I'm here at the Gaylord, and this is the tower that the convention's going to be in, and the parking is right there in that parking garage right there. I'm really excited. This is the new addition since I've been here at the Gaylord. It's quite a big facility and it's going to be really nice. We're going to go do a tour. Hey everybody, I'm here in the hallway where the convention's gonna be, and right in here is gonna be where the SIG room is, and the convention committee is actually inside this next door because they're figuring out AV and how they're gonna do all of it. Look at them working hard. So this is gonna be great. It's such a nice facility. I'm really looking forward to this convention. So here I am in the downstairs lobby at the convention center, and you can see behind me, this is where you'll come in. Registration will be at the far end, and then here's some of the hallways. There's the convention committee, and then here's how you get back to the hotel. So we're gonna go out and check out the hotel now. Okay everybody, I just walked into the Gaylord, and it's a fantastic place. When you come in, you're gonna see this beautiful atrium ahead of you. And you're gonna come right on in, and you're gonna go off to the right for registration, and then the convention's down that hallway, and then your rooms will be out into the beautiful atrium. So let's go take a look at what that looks like. So I'm here at registration, and I thought I would walk us down to where the convention is actually going to be. And I'm a little red because of this really cool art right here. So let's go see how it is to get to convention. So here in the atrium at the Gaylord, there's actually a garden railroad, so you G-scalers are going to have a great time here. You can see it's running through this whole half. I saw a Santa Fe locomotive today, but I've seen other equipment on here too. Hi, we are here at the Gaylord Texan for the 2023 Texas Express NMRA National Convention. I'm here with Donna Orr, the chairwoman of this convention, and Jeff Reichel, the operations director. And Donna, why don't you tell us what people are going to see at convention this year?
Well, this is the 88th annual NMRA convention. This year at the convention, there's going to be at least 168 clinics.
Wow.
We're going to be having the modeling with the masters. There's going to be a fabulous contest room. The National Train Show is also going to be here at the same location. And the one thing you don't want to miss is the kickoff meeting on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock.
With the NMRA president.
Yes.
We've been touring the facility today, and I have to say these rooms are really nice. The clinic rooms, all of the rooms, the contest room, we got to see them all. They're fantastic. I'm here working on the prototype tours, which is my favorite part, to do the rail fan tours and all the trains that we're going to ride. And Jeff, why don't you tell us about layout tours?
So there's going to be layout tours for 4 consecutive days, both morning and evening times. There will be buses to many of those tours, but there will also be some layouts where you'll have the ability to drive up to do an independent one. The hosts were graciously enough to open their layouts to our environment and to our convention goers. And
it's going to be great. I've seen some of these layouts.
Some of these
and
layouts
they
are
fantastic.
spectacular.
I am so excited for this convention, and we can't wait to see you here in August 2023. This fantastic tower, and across the way from here is the Saginaw Diamond, and we're going to go learn about Gavilan grain. in Saginaw, and we just went through what was Gavilon Grain, is now Viterra Grain. They were just bought by a company, and we went through this building. It was fantastic. We actually were up on top. This will be a really interesting tour. The other part of this Saginaw Railfan tour is to be right here, right behind me where the signal is. This is the Diamond, the Saginaw Diamond. While I've been here, there have been a lot of trains until, of course, I get out of the car to walk over here, but I'm sure one will come shortly. So that was Whataburger, and it's delicious. So we're here at BNSF headquarters, and they have these beautiful passenger cars, and we're gonna go inside and set up the rail tour with them. We're really excited about this tour of the Network Operations Center. So here we go. So here in the beautiful visitor center, I have a favorite artifact, and I just love it. It's this beautiful desk right here, because when you look at the little plaque right there, this is the desk of James J. Hill, the empire builder, right there. Just right there, like you could sit down. Amazing. So we just completed a walk through the tour that we're going to do for the 2023 Texas Express NMRA convention, and it is fantastic. We're here at BNSF headquarters. You get to see these beautiful cars. Their art collection is unparalleled, unrivaled. It's fabulous, and they have a gift shop, and I went and bought this bag, and it's full of t-shirts. So not only do you get to see art, trains, the Network Operations Center, they actually have a gift shop too. So we're here at the TMP station, Texas and Pacific, and look at that. I have to bend way down for you to see the top of this building. Over here in the corner is the TMP Tavern. This is part of the stations tour for convention. We're really excited. We're gonna go check out the station on the inside, and we're just here to plan this tour. the TRE line, and this is where the rail tour will end at this really cool station. And there's a restaurant. So we are here at the McKinney Avenue Trolley. This is going to be a fun tour of riding the trolley through downtown Dallas. And we're going to tour the barn, which is right in there, and you'll get a private car ride. And you'll get to see all of Dallas. It'll be really neat to go through the neighborhoods and ride in the historic trolleys.
Yes.
Well, I'm back at Love Field, and it's time to head back to Colorado into some snow, which we guarantee you will not have snow in August at this convention. I've had a great time. The rail tours came together nicely. I'm excited for each and every one of them, and I think you will be too. And I look forward to seeing you all at convention in August. So make sure that you get registered today. And I gotta go get on this plane.
Well, welcome back. Wasn't that a fantastic video? Great video there, Michelle. Thank you so much for going all the way to Texas to do that. I can't remember where my invite was for that trip, but never mind. I'm sure it's still lost in the post, but it all looks fantastic. So if you've not registered for the Texas Express Convention in summer, you better get on with it, because if you want to go on those tours and you want to be first on the bus, then them tours are going to be available for booking real soon. And if you're not registered, you can't book. So you better get registered. Get over to the Texas Express website and register today for what's going to be a fantastic convention. And the hotel registration's open as well, so you can get your room while you're there. So all good stuff. So we're supposed to be doing a chat with Gordy. Before we did the Michelle video, we asked you to pop in some questions in the chat. So we'll hit the questions, and then we'll head over. I wanted to talk to you and show you some things that are going on in the world of the NMRA, and we'll talk for the next 15-20 minutes here, ready for between now and the next clinician. So, the question that we saw there was from Benoit, which was, as the NMRA wants to be an international organization, what would be the approach for countries where a national association already exists? So there are many national organizations in the United States as well as in Europe as well. The NMRA isn't trying to take anyone's piece of the cake. The NMRA is the only global model railroad organization, and every model railroader uses NMRA standards for their railroad, whether you realize it or not. I think that the challenge is, we want to grow our organization tenfold. We want to have 150,000 members. We don't want to stay where we are. We want to grow and be more appealing, and so that's going to involve us as we go more global to start to work with organizations in country. The difference between most national organizations and the NMRA is that the NMRA is open for all scales, all prototypes, all experience, all backgrounds. Pretty much, if it's running trains that you want to do, that's where we're at. So the NMRA is just about running trains. We're not about political takeovers. We're not trying to do anything like that. We don't need to. We are the longest standing international model railroad organization. We're the only one. We are global. We're in Australia, New Zealand, the Far East, in Asia. We're all across Europe and across the North America, as well as having members down in South America. And I know Mike down in Chile is really wanting to get a South American region, or even just a Chile region of the NMRA going down there. So there's lots of things happening, and we'll see more growth in the next years. Whether we'll change our name to be the International Model Railroad Association or the International Model Rail Association, I think the conversation's been going with that since 1945, so almost as long as the organization's been going. I think it is something that we need to look at. Certainly, it's not something that I'm tabling, um, but I think it is something that the National Board of Directors is starting to think about, is starting to consider. Those conversations are taking place, whether our current name represents who we are. But certainly the majority of our members are in North America, so it continues to be the National Model Railroad Association. But we will see what happens in the future. So keep firing questions in. I'm joined today in the background by Speed. So Speed's keeping his eye on the questions, as is Jacob here, and they'll point some questions out to me. But I just wanted to talk about a few things that have been going on in the last few months. So on Thursday, it was 2 months since we launched the NMRA Interchange. And if you're thinking, what is the Interchange? What's Gordy talking about? The NMRA Interchange is a Discord server for the NMRA. We spent a lot of time making sure that NMRA members would be verified before they went in there. So unlike our other social media channels, the Interchange, we check that you are an NMRA member when you enter the interchange, and it's only for NMRA members. So there's a little bit less noise. Well, there's a lot less noise and non-model railroading content than you would find on Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media of your choice. So we launched it 2 months ago. We've now got over 600 members of the NMRA in the NMRA interchange. That's great. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I didn't think there would be 600 within 2 months. I've got to be honest. I remember saying to the guys, if we get to 500 by the convention in summer, we'll be doing well. So we've already eclipsed that. Still needed to be a bit more activity. And if anyone that's listening here wants to get more involved with helping us to moderate and run the conversation in the interchange, then please do get in touch with the NMRAx team, because it is yet another project that's been delivered by that very same team. So same folk delivering it, and we want to drive it forward. We want people to take forward conversations, activities, organize events in the interchange all the time, so that we can make the conversation go on a bit more. But I'm going to show you what it looks like, because I appreciate that many people that are watching our stream are not actually yet members of the NMRA. So let's have a look. So here we go. Let's share the screen. So what we're looking at just now, this is the NMRA, this is Discord, which is the platform that we use, and you're looking at the NMRA interchange. We're in the workbench channel. The interchange is sort of like a forum in that it has lots of channels instead of topics, but there's topics within the channels. So the channels, we've split them up by what we thought would be the most appropriate topics for our members. So we've got some general ones, workbench being one of them, what's on your workbench, but we've also got a channel for each NMRA division, each NMRA region, and what we do there is we limit who has access to a channel if it's for a division or for a region. But we've also got voice channels. So just up here in the left on the menu, you can see some hangout rooms. Those hangout rooms that I'm just hovering over, they're voice channels, so we can go in there and chat. They're open 24 hours a day. You can organize with your friends to go on here and chat. You don't need to have a Zoom account. You don't need to share a link. You don't need to schedule it. You just all need to go over to the NMRA interchange. So let's have a look at the workbench channel as an example. So here we can see lots of things that are going on. Our very own Speed has got some before and after photographs of a model that he's working on. I have no idea what he's done there, but it looks like we've taken a hacksaw to a breadboard, which is always entertaining. And so it's not just here is how successful I am. It looks like David here is building some Fremo N modules. That looks like quite a stack. If that's the module stacked up there, that's a lot of modules. We've got other things that go on here. So we can see that Cameron's been working on N-scale intermounting cars and super detailing them. See all the brake gear going on there. Look fantastic. We've got some stuff that's been delivered, some other things that people are working on. That's an Android kit. They're quite old kits. That's some good work there by Ed. We've got somebody working on a KD logging caboose. We've got some more models that are being worked on here. So it's really about sharing the hobby and enjoying it together as NMRA members. So that's one of them. We've also got a channel here just about NMRA events. So we can see the Rock River Valley train show in the Midwest region. In the Rock River Valley division. We see that's taking place right now. So if you're over in that area, if you're in Illinois, get yourself over to their train show. And we can see lots of other things that are getting posted in here. We've also got, so in addition to our convention in Texas, and we have a channel just for Texas. So there's just lots of information there. I'll not worry about what people are concerned with. But there's then also information about the region convention. So every single region of the NMRA holds a convention every year or every other year. And so in the interchange now, we're sharing information and giving people the opportunity to ask questions about what's going on in their region. So we can see that we've got the Thousand Lake region in 2023. Their convention is going to be in Bloomington, Minnesota on May 18th to the 21st. So that's coming up quite soon. So if people don't know where Bloomington is, it's in the Twin Cities. So get yourself over there to their website. You could consider going there in May. We've also got the Pacific South Regions Convention, which is going to be in Flagstaff, Arizona, June 7th to the 11th. So if you want somewhere a little bit warmer than Minnesota, there's your choices. And we've also got the SCR Convention in Cartersville. And what you may have noticed as I'm clicking on these is that the white text is disappearing as I'm clicking on them because it shows that I've read what's there. So the cool thing about the interchange, unlike a forum, is it always takes you back to where you were, and so you can then see what you're looking at is new. So it's you're not forgetting anything. It's not all moved on like Facebook would. If you don't go on Facebook for a month, you wouldn't see the post from a month ago because the world has moved on. With the interchange, if you've not been there for a month and you come back, as you can see here, I think I've not been on here since March the 6th. So it will take me back to where I was, and it shows the red line there says March 6th. That's where I was last in this channel, and everything underneath it is new. So really good way of doing it. Also, for those doing the achievement program, we've got channels on everything about the achievement program, every single part of it. You can ask loads of questions. Here's some evidence about people have done for their chief dispatcher. And here's some information about cars that people are working on for their car certificate. We can see what Dan's doing there, and a few other folk. So really, really good. I'm going to stop sharing that now. But it is a really, really good tool. We're really pleased. Oh, we can also see some events. So there's a couple of events going on. This is the kind of thing that happens in the interchange. So now on a Saturday, and it's going to be at 2 a.m. my time. That's local time to me. Don't panic. I think that is going to be maybe maybe 7 Eastern. I'm gonna have to try and work that out because our time zones changed tonight. But so it shows you in your local time zone. Sorry, that's next week. So yeah, it will be 8 p.m. Eastern. So it's next Saturday, not this Saturday. I just noticed April 1st. So there's a group that is doing something called building in the interchange. So this is where everyone just gets together, sits at their workbench, and builds something and talks. I don't know how people do that. Gordy struggles to do that. I get too distracted. But yeah, building and talking at the same time. Yeah, I struggle. That's not something that Gordy's very good at doing. And then we also see there that Jordan Kramer's organising Friday night hangouts for people to grab a couple of beers or a cold refreshment of your choice and just chat about model railroading. So how fantastic is that? So that's what the interchange is. You can see that currently there are 93 members live right now that are in the interchange, and I guarantee if I dropped into one of those hangout rooms, I'd have a few people talking to me. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to avoid it, and we're just going to stop the share. So the interchange is now live. Absolutely fantastic tool. I really hope that people that are members of the NMRA have checked that out. If you're not, a member of the NMRA, then these are one of the benefits you can get. Another one of our benefits is our partnership program. So this is where we have a partnership with vendors, manufacturers, smaller ones. This isn't a partnership with Atlas, for example, because Atlas is selling into multiple local hobby shops. It would just be too great of a burden for us, and wouldn't want to undercut the local hobby shops pricing. But we have small hobby manufacturers, from people that make craftsman kits to people that sell tools to people that sell paintings, even, that are part of the NMRA partnership program. There's well over 50 partners now. I think we've added 2 more in the last couple of days. Some of them are on the rolling adverts, and we appreciate their support. So you can go over and get that. As well, what's happened recently since we were last on is, if you want to support NMRAx and help with funds towards NMRAx, you can now buy yourself, just over my shoulder. Here he is. Oops, I can't do this very well. There we go. He's there. You can now get yourself a mini Gordy, drinking a beverage. You choose what I'm drinking. Okay, you're painting this, not me, but I am drinking a beverage. So this was a pose taken of me at Amherst. It's actually from a picture that Jordan Kramer took of me when we went rail fan in the West Highland line in Scotland back in November last year, and he caught me standing with one of my very large coffee mugs, which is how Gordy keeps going, copious amounts of coffee, standing watching the trains in the middle of the Highlands, and all we could see was deer on the hillside. We could hear the gold mining going on in the valley, and we could see the trains going past. It was fantastic, and it just caught me there in that pose. So that's the pose that we did. I was also wearing my NMRAx hoodie. So, and if you want an NMRAx hoodie, you can buy one from Daylight Sales. So get yourself over to Daylight Sales. You can buy a NMRAx hoodie. The proceeds of both items come back to NMRAx and help us put on these great events, which we're currently doing monthly as mini NMRAxes. I think we may look at that. As always, we value your feedback. And if you want us to keep going with NMRAx, we cannot do it without this army of volunteers that provides clinics. But we've put so many people's feet to the fire recently that there's a lot of people with burn injuries. A lot of emergency rooms have been filled with burn injuries from speed burning people, trying to get them to do another clinic. So we're always looking for new content. If you want to promote what you're doing, promote your modeling, and share your stuff with the world, just like David and Nick did earlier today, then please consider giving an NMRAx clinic. Get in touch with myself or Speed or anyone from the team, and we will. We'll work with you to help you get the tools and things that you need to provide a really good NMRAx clinic in the future. We're looking for clinics for April, for example. So that's how short we are. When we're never not transparent. We are looking for more content. If we want NMRAx to continue, then we need people to come forward. I see a question. We'll take a question. Does Gordy ever sleep? Yes. Gordy's not going to fib. No, he's not going to lie. Gordy does sleep. Some days shorter, some days less sleep than others, but Gordy does sleep. Although there is a myth that Gordy doesn't sleep, and certainly if you've seen me and Speed at a national convention, you'll know that we don't really get very much sleep. Sleep is for the aeroplane on the way home, I think, and on the aeroplane on the way over for me anyway. But we do work very hard for you. We volunteer. None of us get paid for this, so we do work very, very hard. So the how do we select clinics for NMRAx? That's a great question. So generally, what we'll do is we have a database, and people offer us clinics. You might offer more than one, and what we'll do is we'll work with you on what are your available dates, right out as far as the horizon as we've got. And then we'll try to get a selection on those dates. So we'll try to work in your clinics so that the topics are not all the same. So we don't want 4 clinics on the same day, all about scratch building a USRA box car, right? But we would want to try and get that the venue. Generally, we don't turn anybody down. You will need to do a sound test, so we'll need to make sure that you're able to share your content. You'll show us a little bit of your content for 5 minutes. We'll make sure that your audio is okay. Make sure that your background is okay. Make sure that we can see you clearly. Your webcam isn't terrible, and your internet connection's good enough that it's not going to drop out. And we'll work with that. If you're wanting to do a clinic where you're showing any techniques, we're probably going to ask you to pre-record it, just simply because it looks better. The image quality on a mobile phone camera is much better than a webcam usually. So we'll ask you to pre-record it. You'll send that through, and we'll either do a hybrid clinic where you're talking for a wee bit and we're showing you videos, or we'll just show the whole video. So if you go back and look at NERX, which is just finished, which big ups to Speed and the team from the Northeastern region. Fantastic convention last week, although most of it was at a time when half of it Gordy was sleeping. Not all of it. So most of it. Some of it Gordy had to sleep. It finished at 2 a.m. and I had to be up at 6. But I did get to see quite a lot of it. Fantastic presentations there, and you'll see the hybrid mix of what I'm talking about. Some of those presentations were pre-recorded, some of it was live, some of it was a bit of both. So go back and have a look at NERX. You'll see what we want to do. So we don't hold any kind of bar on what people want to talk about, as long as it's model railroad related. I think that's the one thing we don't want is somebody to come in and give a topic that's about dolls' houses, for example. It just wouldn't fit with what we're here to try to do. It's a virtual model railroad convention. It's been going now for 3 years next month. So as of I think it's the 14th of April, we've been going for 3 years for NMRAx. I thought we'd just be doing it for a one-off. Remember, 24 hours of model railroading clinics. Let's just get over this 6 weeks of chaos with the pandemic, and look how wrong I was there. 3 years later, we're still doing it, still growing, and it's still providing a great benefit to model railroaders. So if you want to give a clinic for NMRAx, then please consider doing so. So there's a couple of things going on in the NMRA as well we should probably touch upon. Next month marks a year of the NMRA Digital Magazine. So actually, this was the 12th edition. No, it wasn't. No, it was. Yeah, something like that. 12th edition of the digital magazine just came out with the April edition, and so that's been running now for 12 months, and it's been really good. We've got about 3,000 or 4,000 people that are regularly reading the magazine on their tablet or their mobile phone or online. That continues to grow. I know that Riley and the publications team are looking to add some regional publications. We're certainly working on a project to see what we need to do that and how we would fund it. But we're looking to add additional titles to the NMRA magazine app in addition to the NMRA magazine itself. We're also looking to add some additional content. So we may be able to be in the future adding videos and additional photographs, because we just can't print all the photographs that we get about for people's layouts in the actual print magazine, but we can obviously add an unlimited amount of photographs to our digital content, our digital platform. So we'll be looking at putting all that in the next year, and I just see that the world of digital publishing for the NMRA growing, which is fantastic, because it means that some of those older publications that are out of print, we may be able to bring back in the future. So lots and lots of work going on there with digital publishing. Also, where should we go next after digital publishing? I guess we've done the interchange, we've done IT. So our IT team, we'll talk about IT. Speed's on here, so he's going to be like getting really nervous now. But with our IT team, The work continues to move our website from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. It's a huge project, but we continue to do that, and that will enable us to have a new website that's a lot more capable, a bit more seamless with the shop and the renewal process. So we'll be doing a bit of that, and then. Where were we? I've just got a question coming, so I'll pick your question up in a second, David. But I've just got a question coming. And then the other thing that's really looking exciting with the NMRA is our Fremo N layout for Texas. So fantastic, absolutely fantastic work by Lee Corkins and John Young and other big names in the Fremo N and OPSIG community. Going to give you guys all the opportunity to operate a layout for the first time and be taught train order and timetable operations. If you've never operated before, really safe space. It's kind of a hands-on clinic, and it's free. That's the best bit. It's free. You just need to sign up when you get to the convention. Gordy's making a module, Speed's making modules. Everybody's pitching in and showing how much of a community the NMRA really is. There's a lot of folks that have never built a Fremo module in their lives, Gordy included, that are in the process of making one. Although Gordy's a bit nuts because mine's 3D printed, and there may well be a clinic on that in the future. So someone just asked me about the call tipple that's behind me over my shoulder. These are HO Fremo modules. And I didn't build them. These were I saved these from being skipped or dumpstered, basically. This is my HO call branch. We're adding 7 more modules over my shoulder beyond the call tipple that you can't see. I guess the best way to describe my layout is it's like a squashed pretzel shape. You know, you've heard of the spaghetti ball. Gordy brings you the pretzel and beer bowl, and that is my call branch layout. So it's like the horns of a bull. There is a junction in the staging yard in the center of the horns, and then there's 2 branch lines that come out. You're seeing one end of the branch lines, and that is a Wolfers call tipple that's been heavily kit bashed. It's can't remember what the name of the kit is, but it's very famous Wolfers call tipple kit. It's normally a 3-road call tipple. It's been completely kit bashed there, that you can see that's on the layout, and that's one of 2 call tipples at the moment. There'll be a couple of truck tipples on the new bits of the layout, and probably another big call tipple as well. So it's just a Appalachian coal mining branch. No specific prototype. It's done in a way that we can operate 90s equipment all the way back into the 1920s if we wanted to. So that's what's here in my house behind me. Don't panic, everyone. Still an N scaler, and there's still plenty of N scale. But this is just a really good thing for the children to work on, a bit better than N scale. New River Mining. There we go. I knew it was River something, but there we go. Thank you, Chuck. So Mark Stafford asked one more question. Is there any NMRA spec for using RFID, and if so, where do you read up on those specs? There is not, so that's a simple one for that. So we'll cut that there. That was a quick, I feel like I've not breathed. That was a really quick 20 minutes chatting with Gordy. I hope you kept up. Apologies for the lack of subtitles. Hopefully YouTube can figure all that out. But I'm going to go for a few minutes, and Jacob will be right back with our next clinic. Thanks for watching NMRAx.
welcome back to NMRAx, your favorite online model train clinic show. So our next clinic, they are a graduate student in molecular astrobiology by day and auspiciously an 1890s ON30 modeler by night. They are now a part-time recreational PowerPointician, spreading the good word of modern inner-city passenger rail and rail transit systems. An extreme aficionado of travel, has visited 49 states, motorcycled every single county in Pennsylvania, bicycled more than 100 miles in a day, and ridden over 16,000 miles on Amtrak. They're passionate about bridging generational divides in model railroading while promoting diversity, inclusivity, and hobby outreach. Please welcome G4.
Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction there. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I am here to talk to you today about how passenger service is prototypical on small modern switching layouts. This is the most clickbaity title I could come up with for this presentation. With that wonderful introduction already underway, I guess I'll at least provide a few pictures for you. So again, I am a grad student in molecular astrobiology at Penn State University. I have one academic byline to my name. As mentioned, I have a slight problem with travel. I think I single-handedly broke Google Maps. And then here are some pictures of the railroad that I'm modeling, the Altoona and Beach Creek, or the amusingly acronymed A and BC. And then I'm also quite possibly the first openly trans model railroader and probably the 18 millionth autistic model railroader. That's a punchline, by the way. It usually works very well with younger generations. Anyway, moving on. So this entire presentation series came from 2017 when I moved from Washington State to New York, and I was supremely disappointed by what I found. You see, all of the West Coast transit systems that I grew up with, like here in Salt Lake and Seattle, they are sleek and new and cool, and they work well. And all the ones that I found on the East Coast were old and rusty and ugly and ineffectual. So I basically became a self-taught urban transit planner in order to put words to the differences that I was seeing to describe things for my friends back home. And along the way, I made some modeling relevant discoveries. So this is what I'm calling part 2 of my modern modeling anthology. Part 1, I debuted in October 2021 on NMRAx, modeling modern transit systems. I simply described what is modern transit, how does it differ from old trolleys, and how does it relate to traditional modeling subjects. This is part 2, where we're going to zoom in on DMUs and show you what a layout and an operating session would look like for this particular type of technology. And then part 3, which is still in the works, maybe I'll debut it sometime soon, but if I love the title of this one for being clickbaity, the next one is probably the coolest thing I could ever bring into this world. Proto-freelancing in the wrong direction, my accidental quest to model the near future. But that's another story for another time. So as far as this presentation goes, we're going to start with what are DMUs, where are DMUs, and how are DMUs. Then we're going to zoom in on the Sprinter, show how that can be turned into a beginner layout, show how that can be expanded into a room size layout, zoom in on the River Line, show how you can make a room size layout out of that, and then end with whence are DMUs. So basically the thesis for this presentation, I think there's a very strong motivation to look at DMUs. I want to make the point that they fit in with existing tropes in the hobby. They do not need dedicated layouts, as with traction or trolley layouts of yore. The recent product offerings that now make it easily modelable, and in fact, they're so modelable that they can be done even on the smallest units of model railroading, like switching layouts or 4x8s. So if you didn't see the first presentation, a brief recap of transit history. It goes horse cars, street cars, PCC cars, no PCC cars, so people had to reinvent the PCC cars, and the moment that light rail burst onto this scene, people were looking for cheaper alternatives like bus rapid transit, which, to be sure, does not work as well as light rail, but still has a place in modern urban culture. But along the way, people also discovered diesel multiple unit hybrid light rail transit, or just DMUs for short. Now, a very important thing that I want to clarify here, DMUs are not the same thing as RDCs, or rail diesel cars, the Bud-built vehicles from the 1950s. First off, RDCs ran between cities, whereas DMUs are much more metropolitan. RDCs ran infrequently, whereas DMUs are frequent. So basically, RDCs are an ultra-cheap intercity passenger train, whereas DMUs are an ultra-cheap surface-level subway for a city. Now, of course, there are some exceptions. Several DMU systems, namely the A train in Denton and the WES in Portland, actually used RDCs as initial startup vehicles, allowing for later budget flexibility to buy the newer vehicles after service had already begun. And then conversely, in the 1950s, the Boston and Maine actually used 108 RDCs, mostly in Boston area commuter service, which acted much as do modern DMU systems. So, of course, like with every rule, there is an exception. But overall, DMUs are much more similar to light rail. There are a few differences between them. Obviously, light rail is electric, DMUs are diesel. Light rail is usually very high frequency with 5 to 30-minute headways, whereas DMUs are usually medium frequency, 30 to 60 minutes between trains. Light rail usually, but not always, has multiple lines in a system. DMUs usually, but not always, have only a single line. And then light rail kind of connects a city to its neighborhoods a little bit more like a subway, whereas DMUs connect a city to its suburbs a little bit more like commuter rail. Also notably, light rail has often right-of-way exclusive from freight trains, but it also does have some mixed street running, like you can see here in Phoenix. And then DMUs usually share rights-of-way with freight trains, but rarely have segments of street running. Now, some DMUs are actually very similar to regular transit systems, like you can see here the River Line in New Jersey. It actually runs in mixed traffic with automobiles. The Union Pearson Express in Toronto has its own dedicated guideways to the airport. And then eBART in Antioch, California actually offers a cross-platform transfer with the traditional regular subway system. But overall, most DMU systems share at least some segment of their length with freight railroads. Like you can see here, the Ottawa O train in Canada, it has its operations and maintenance facility next to a freight yard. And then I honestly just love this picture because it does a lot of the heavy lifting for me here. This is the A train in Denton, Texas, and you can see here's a station for it. Right across the road, there a line of sight visible from the station, there is a regular freight railroad industry spur. So this shows that they are usually in very tight and immediate proximity. Now, the thing that makes DMUs different is that they usually don't require massive infrastructure projects, like you can see this under construction bridge over a highway for a new light rail system in Seattle. They allow you instead to bring transit to places that already have existing rail lines, thus significantly lowering the construction costs. But I want to make an important distinction here. DMUs are not a cheaper way to build a high-capacity subway or light rail system of equal quality. Instead, they lower the barrier to entry in order to bring transit to places that already have existing rail infrastructure, like urban freight switching lines. Do you see where I'm going with this? All right, there are 11 DMU systems found in North America, 3 in the Northeast, 3 in Texas, and the balance on the Pacific Coast. Let's take a tour of all of them. The first one in North America was the Trillium Line, part of the O-Train system in Ottawa, opening in 2001, starting from a bus transfer center, now a light rail transit center next to downtown Ottawa, extending south for a few stations. The first stateside line was the River Line in New Jersey in 2004, connecting Trenton and Camden in southern New Jersey. 2008 brought us the Sprinter in Oceanside, California, connecting two commuter rail systems with Escondido. 2009 brought us the West Side Express in Portland, Oregon, connecting the southwestern side with the Beaverton Transit Center on Portland's already enormous light rail network. 2010 brought us the Capital Metro Rail in Austin, Texas, connecting the capital with Austin's northwestern suburbs. 1 year later, the A-Train in Denton, Texas, connected University of North Texas and Denton with Dallas's already extensive light rail network going around Dallas. Then 2015 brought us the Union Pearson Express in Toronto, Ontario, connecting Toronto Union Station with Toronto Pearson Airport, utilizing mostly existing commuter rail rights of way. 2017 brought us the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, or SMART, going from San Rafael, just across the bay from San Francisco into Sonoma County. 1 year later brought us eBART in Antioch, California, which, to quote one of my all-time favorite YouTubers, with the exception of the park and ride abomination called eBART, which I will never mention again because it should be stricken from the face of the earth. I could not agree more, but that's another story. 2019 brought us TexRail in Fort Worth, Texas, extending from downtown Fort Worth and connecting with the Dallas Light Rail Network at the DFW airport. And then hot off the presses, just this past December, the Arrow opens in Redlands, California, connecting the San Bernardino commuter rail station with the Redlands State University 5 stations away. So many of the systems that I've actually just described are actually in the process of still currently expanding, and I've kind of hidden these maps in the previous slides. So the Capital Metro Rail in Austin, they're building a second line which will connect to its northeastern suburbs. SMART is extending deeper into Sonoma County. The O train in Ottawa is extending further south and branching into 2 lines, one of them offering airport connections. The River Line in New Jersey is building a whole second line, the Glassboro-Camden line to the south, and then for some reason the transit system, which shall not be named, is also being considered for expansion instead of demolition. There's another new line, technically the Silver Line in Dallas, Texas, run by DART. It will connect with the Fort Worth TexRail DMU, and it will be a radial line connecting 3 different light rail systems across the northern suburbs, allowing better suburb-to-suburb connection and service. But there are also a bunch of other lines which currently remain unfunded and just simply in the proposal stage. Like one of them is the Lower Montauk Line in New York, which would connect to Jamaica Station and Long Island City along a former branch served by the Long Island Railroad, but not now. And I think that this is particularly important because it plugs the least forgivable transit desert in North America, if not the world. The New York City subway system is the largest in the world with 472 stations, and only 3 of them are in Lower Queens. This is embarrassing. We need to fix that. Another line in Chicago would be the Suburban Transit Access Route, and they're also considering the Metro Southeast service. The Star Route would be another radial line offering better suburb-to-suburb service and connecting with all of the existing commuter rail lines. But the thing that I find most interesting about this system is this wacky rendering right here. It looks like it's from an early 2000s survival horror point-and-click game, like you're boarding a train to Black Mesa. I do not know who was responsible for this or who would ever put it on a public-facing document. Anyway, another system which is not actually formally proposed, more of informally proposed through the Seattle Transit blog in an article in 2016 that taught me everything that I needed to know about DMUs, is the BNSF Renton brand. So most of the Black Line is Seattle's already existing commuter rail system. This would be a small 2-station extension into downtown Renton, which is currently a little bit of a transit desert, and it would also serve the large Boeing factory there. Another interesting line, for a while in the early 2000s, Anchorage, Alaska was considering turning parts of the Alaska Railroad into a commuter rail system, and it faced some interesting and unique challenges. Like, for example, here, every single station would have to have a heated waiting area because this is Alaska. If you spend too much time outside in the winter, you would die. But it doesn't seem to have moved anywhere in the past 15 years. There have also been on and off proposals to bring DMUs to the branches of the Long Island Railroad or the MBTA in Boston. And you can see the diesel branches here on the LIRR. And this is really important because not only are the DMUs more efficient and more environmentally friendly vehicles, they would also replace these toasters, which are the 3rd ugliest vehicles to have ever plied the rails. We'll cover the other 2 later. But of all of the proposed projects, I think the one that is most likely to be built and probably the most important is the Passaic-Bergen-Hudson Transit, which would connect with the commuter rail hub of Secaucus Junction. And it would also be built along with freight railroad links. And it would extend north, connect with the Hudson-Bergen Light Rail, and create one new line, which would serve previously unserved suburbs. And it would create a second radial line, which would offer connections between all of the existing commuter rail lines into New York. But overall, DMUs are such an ascendant mode share that Stadler, I think the Swiss DMU and EMU manufacturer, they built a dedicated DMU factory just outside of Salt Lake in order to cope with the demand for this increasing mode share. So it is very likely we are going to see many more DMU systems in the country very soon. All right, now that we've covered the basics, what do DMUs look like? I think the easiest place to start is with the rolling stock. Now, of course, there are some oddball vehicles here and there, and then, of course, the RDCs, which I think are still in active service in Portland, but we can make some generalizations. The first is that the Stadler GTW 2/6 is by far the most common vehicle. It's operating on 4 systems. You can see it here, a slightly modified front end on the River Line, and then in its regular form here on Capital Metro Rail in Austin and the A train in Denton, in addition to the transit system, which shall not be named, in Antioch, California. The second most common vehicle, but definitely the newest on the scene and probably likely to be the most common sometime very soon, is the Stadler Flirt. You can see it here on Arrow in Redlands, California, TexRail in Fort Worth, and the O train in Ottawa. Then comes the Siemens Desiro or Desiro. I'm not too certain how it's pronounced. But like the Stadler GTW and the Flirt, it is a US port of an existing European model, and it can be seen here on the O train in Ottawa and the the Sprinter in Southern California. Then there is also the Nippon Sharyo DMUs, a Japanese manufactured vehicle seen here in Toronto and in Sonoma County. Uniquely, this actually has an option for unpowered middle cars in order to increase train length. And also the cabbed vehicles, even though they have directional cabs, they are still bidirectional. Much like an RDC, there's actually an auxiliary cab in the middle or at the other end of the vestibule, so a single vehicle can make bidirectional trips. And this was also briefly in consideration for use on the West in Portland and the MBTA in Boston. Then the least common vehicle is the Colorado Rail Car DMU. Here's their original demonstrator vehicle from the early 2000s, and then 6 were ordered for the West in Portland. Thankfully, Colorado Rail Car has gone bankrupt since it built these because these are just so ugly, in my opinion. It's the second ugliest thing to ever ply rails. What's the first, you ask? Well, unfortunately, before they went bankrupt, they weren't finished, and they brought this absolute monstrosity to Miami-Dade County. I have no words. Anyway, moving on. So models of many of these vehicles do exist, but most of them are actually non-US options. Pico actually does make the Stadler vehicles in HO and N scales. And I did in fact learn recently that they do have options, or that they do run on NMRA standard DCC systems. So really only you would need to repaint them if you wanted to use the European models, but you would still get things like station announcements in Greek or German. So not exactly the most North American thing, all things considered, but there are options. But of course, to anybody who's in the know, the main raison d'etre for this entire presentation is the fact that just this past summer, Pico released the NCTD Sprinter in DCC and sound options and multiple road numbers. This marks the first time when you can actually buy a ready-to-run model of a prototype that actually plies North American rails. So of course, I immediately purchased one, even though I'm not modeling Southern California at all. Now, if you wanted to be a little bit more creative, a lot of people on Shapeways actually do offer different body shells. Like these are 2 different manufacturers, I think, for the Stadler Flirts. And so you could take, for example, the Pico Desiro and swap out the body shell in order to make a functional model of a Stadler Flirt. But of course, that would be a lot of effort and time. Anyway, back to the infrastructure of what DMUs look like. They are usually backbones for their regional transit systems. Like you can see here, maps of SMART in Northern California and the Sprinter in Southern California. They are very heavily interlined with all of their bus routes. And you can see here from this map that most DMU stations effectively function as very small transit centers with a bunch of bus bays for transfer to all of the smaller neighborhood routes. DMUs usually share most of their routes with freight trains, but do have some diversions. Like you can see here, there is in Trenton, New Jersey, a small branch of the DMU away from the freight rail line. We'll talk about this more in a moment. On the A train in Denton, Texas, it shares most of its length with the freight rail line, but I think that this is a fairly busy freight rail junction. So instead of having a level crossing with lots of freight interference, they built a very tiny flyover viaduct in order to free up the DMU passenger constraints from the freight rail movements. Another very good example here of a small diversion from a freight rail line. Outlined in light blue is the original Escondido branch, and you can see here how the DMU takes a short hop over the highway, has an elevated station at Cal State San Marcos, and then hops over the highway again, ducking behind a few backyards in order to rejoin the freight rail line. Now, most DMU systems are actually fully future-proofed for double tracking. Like you can see this picture here of the Sprinter. Almost the entirety of its route has a place where a second track can be laid just as soon as they can purchase more rail and ballast. But this does mean that most DMU systems right now are a mixture of single and double track. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they suffer from capacity constraints. For as you can see here with this string line diagram of the O train in Ottawa, through rigorous scheduling, they've managed to achieve a whopping 10 trains per hour at Bayview Station. In fact, by some estimates, I actually think Bayview is the 5th busiest intercity passenger station in North America, behind only New York, DC, Chicago, and Toronto, because of this incredible forethought in how they've been able to schedule the DMUs. Now, of course, with it being a mixture of single and double track, most of the platforms or most of the stations have a mixture of single and double platforms. And when they're double tracked, they're either island or edge style platforms, and they usually have very simple architecture, which is different from light rail systems, which usually have larger and more extravagant stations. But the stations usually are integrated with a lot of modern pedestrian infrastructure, things like public art and public park projects. Also, since a transit rider becomes a pedestrian whenever they step off the vehicle, there are things like chicanes or barriers in order to control traffic flow and prevent harm to the pedestrians from surrounding cars or DMU vehicles. And then the stations are usually integrated into regional or neighborhood trail networks like you can see here, and they also have things like wayfinding sides in order to access all of these trails. And this is true at most DMU systems, except of course those in Texas, where we all know that pedestrian infrastructure there is simply ornamental and can disappear on a whim. Now, a unique concern that DMUs have to face is that they have different loading gauges from regular freight trains. So probably one of the most common solutions to this is with gauntlet tracks, like you can see here in Portland and Sonoma County, where the DMUs take the inside rails for very close clearance to the stations, leaving a gap of centimeters or less. And then the freight trains take the outside rails, giving them a wide berth from the station such that the platform isn't damaged by a swaying freight car. Uniquely on the Sprinter in Southern California, it actually has folding gates, which retract and close during the middle of the night in order to move away from the track and allow freight trains to go through the station. But I don't think this is used anywhere else except for the Sprinter. But probably the simplest solution is having a simple freight bypass where the station only serves one track and then the freight train takes a different track around it. Now, officially, there has to be some degree of separation between freight trains and passenger vehicles lacking, quote, battleship-like quantities of steel, unquote, because the FRA has very stringent guidelines. Those are not my words, by the way. But it does seem in recent years that these regulations are losing, and hopefully sometime soon we will see more European-style mixture of freight and light passenger vehicles. But as far as things are right now, all of the existing systems were built under this assumption that there had to be some sort of separation. And there are two major solutions to it. The first one is that there's physical separation, such that even if the DMUs run side by side with the freight rail tracks, the tracks aren't actually connected. But probably the most common solution is simply temporal, in as much as passenger trains during the day, freight trains during the night. But as far as I'm concerned, for modeling interest, we can flash our modeler's license and just run both the passenger trains and the freight trains at the same time, because that's more interesting. And also it's likely that that's going to be the case in the future anyway. But overall, I want to make the point here that DMUs are deeply integrated with freight rail. Like especially you can see here in Austin, Texas, Sonoma County actually advertises its municipal switching railroad services as a combination commuter and freight line. The river line runs through a fairly major yard. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And then actually, while I was riding the river line to do research for this presentation, I was able to photograph an actively switching locomotive outside the window of the DMU I was riding. So they are very tightly associated with each other. All right, now that we've gone over the basics of what DMUs are, let's ask ourselves, is it modelable? Can we turn this into a layout? And since Pico released their Sprinter with DCC and sound, I think that's a natural place to start looking to see if we can turn this into a layout. So the Sprinter itself opened in 2008. It is 35 kilometers long, has 15 stations, and a 53-minute end-to-end runtime. It's almost perfectly 50% double-tracked, and it operates using 12 Siemens Desiros, usually operating in pairs, along the ex-Santa Fe Railroad Escondido branch, which opened in 1888 and lost passenger service in 1946. It starts at the Oceanside Transit Center, which is actually a very major hub for passenger rail service in the area. You can take the NCTD Coaster south to downtown San Diego, the Metrolink commuter rail north to downtown Los Angeles or San Bernardino, and then also Amtrak Surfliner makes a station stop running between San Diego and San Luis Obispo. And actually, in this picture right here, you can see the NCTD Sprinter having its own dedicated station platform in the background. Along its length, it serves, unfortunately, mostly typical Southern California non-dense suburbs, but a large portion of its ridership is driven by two universities that it serves, Palomar College up here on the top, and Cal State San Marcos, which you can see here on the bottom, which is very good for ridership, not just because young people generally prefer rail transit to older generations. It's also that universities are all-day traffic generators rather than simple 9 to 5 commuters. And so it makes sense to have all-day dedicated rail service serving them. Another unique feature of the Sprinter that I found while researching it on Google Maps is that it has several pike-sized parking lots. Like you can see here, this parking lot is only twice the length of the station platform, and this parking lot is exactly as long as the station platform itself. And this is very nice and modelable, as opposed to what you often find on most light rail networks, which are suburban parkade ziggurats, temple to the automobile, where we sacrifice our car for 8 or more hours a day while we ride the train into downtown, which is obviously not something that can be easily put onto a layout in a small space. The Sprinter also has several additional interesting modelable features, like there are several freight rail industry spurs that are peppered along its length. There's a Y to the main line, which actually has another industry in the middle of it. And then, of course, there's the bypass branch that I mentioned earlier. But the thing that I think makes the Sprinter the most modelable is the end of the line, Escondido itself. Quickly, in rapid succession, there's a small operations and maintenance facility, a minuscule terminus, and then a switching puzzle, all right next to each other. Looking at them in closer detail, the operations and maintenance facility has only 10 tracks, 7 turnouts. 2 of them are mainline bypass tracks. There are 3 tracks for outdoor plein air storage, and then 2 tracks serving the maintenance facility itself for slightly heavier work or overhauls. Right next to it is the absolutely Lilliputian terminus at the Escondido Transit Center, which actually connects to a bus transit center that offers bus rapid transit service into downtown Escondido, all for the cost of a single turnout. And then right across the street is the switching puzzle with only 6 turnouts. There are 2 team tracks, although as you can see right here, one of them is actually completely buried in dirt, so I actually don't know if this sees any active service right now. There are 2 tracks to the Vita Brand Co-op, a grain elevator, I believe. 1 track to Mission Pools, which again, I'm not entirely certain from this image whether or not Mission Pools gets the freight service or if it's just functioning as an additional team track served by the dirt lot on the other side. And then the tail track of the runaround curves away nicely into Schuster Oil, which similarly, I can't actually tell if this receives active rail service right now. You would have to go onto the ground in order to see if it has the infrastructure capable of receiving tank cars, but let's just flash our modeler's license and says that it does and say that it does anyway. Now, all of this, it's practically begging to be modeled because it's in such a tight confines to each other. In fact, it's so much so that I think it could even be turned into a 4x8 layout. So that's what I made. Let me take you on a tour. So starting with the Escondido switching puzzle, there's the track to Schuster Oil, which I've turned into the continuous running connection. But you can use the buildings and maybe general dereliction of the spur in order to hide the fact that it runs in a loop. Then there's 1 team track. I didn't have space for the other. And again, I don't know if it receives active service. And I also had to shove the Mission Pools spur over into the corner. But wait, what can you do? And all of this is supremely compressed. There's a curved turnout and squished spurs. But by my estimation, I think that this still has room for a lot of traffic, and it can hold up to 14 cars, mostly at the Vita Brand Co-op. And switching this would be especially difficult if you maintained tail track discipline and didn't allow the switcher locomotive to go back onto the continuous running connection. Around the edge of the 4x8 quote-unquote peninsula is the Escondido Transit Center. I've managed to preserve the interesting bus bulge transit center for BRT service. And then I also added Escondido Creek, which is a pitiful concrete-walled trickle for my suburban take on the beginner layout river corner trope. Then, of course, moving to the main raison d'etre for the entire layout is the Sprinter operations and maintenance facility itself. There's unfortunately only 1 track going into the main line, then 2 tracks for plein air storage, and one of them is an unprototypical spur, but both of them are barely 2 DMUs long, and then 2 tracks going into the maintenance building with space enough for 1 DMU per spur. And then, interestingly, because of space constraints, I had to combine the storage track runaround into the spur going into the Escondido Transit Center, which kind of creates kind of a reverse switchback or crossover, but unfortunately, thankfully, this doesn't have any constraints for freight switching because you wouldn't be doing any runaround maneuvers on this side of the layout, so it still can operate mostly prototypically. A staging yard for this layout really doesn't have to be too big or complicated. Really all you need is a 2-track runaround for the freight train with a tail track the length of a single locomotive. But for the DMUs, since they're bidirectional, you don't need to make them into a runaround, and you only need stub tracks as long as the longest DMU lash up, which in this case is a mere 2 vehicles. Now, of course, an absolute necessity for beginner layouts is the option for future expansion. So I've built this out into a room size layout. Continuing on the tour from the 4x8, we first encounter Nordal Road Station, a single track station, then the prototypical industry spur to the Pine Tree Lumber Company for a lot of center beam flat cars of plywood. And then I kind of had to move the Palomar College Station around in order to start the double track segment a little bit earlier. We'll talk about why this is important in a moment. Moving around to the next side is the Cal State San Marcos bypass. I also was able to preserve this interesting looking glass diamondy office building, which hides a sneak away track for the main line. And then on the freight section of the freight bypass, there's a shared spur to 2020 Plumbing and Heating and the restaurant depot. And then the Sprinter ends at Oceanside Transit Center, where it has a connection to the main line. Unfortunately, I did have to nix the Y for space constraints, but it still has its one platform, two track terminus connected to the main platform tracks. And then continuing around the room, there's a lift bridge for a room exit, and then a sub-level of wraparound staging with a two-track main line. And you could have 2 to 4 additional tracks just to store additional trains, but otherwise it allows you to autonomously loop some trains while you're operating the rest of the branch line. Now, uniquely as far as this layout goes, I also included a contiguous road network, which you could turn into an operating bus system with the Faller car system. And I think that this is particularly important. Everybody knows the concept beyond the basement, right? That's why we have staging yards, to make it look like our trains are going elsewhere off layout and doing other things. But I think that this is rarely applied to the non-train aspects of world building. In fact, there are famous schools of the hobby that maintain the layout only needs to be 8 inches wide between cities or stations. But as we saw, beyond the basement is particularly more important for DMUs because DMU transit systems are an absolute spine or backbone for their local bus routes. And thus, showing integration between different modes of transit at the stations is a very important quote-unquote industry to generate passengers and further justify the existence of the DMU. So what I've done here is I've had a contiguous road where you can have a bus that orbits and stops at 3 of the different stations. Yes, it does go unprototypically in the wrong direction, but it's an interesting way to bring animation and intrigue to an otherwise fairly small layout. Now, an operating scheme for this layout would start in the morning with all of the DMUs at the operations and maintenance facility and a freight train tucked away in staging. Then in the morning before rush hour, you could rearrange the DMU lash-ups, maybe take some in and out of the OMF building for a maintenance cycle, and then park them at Escondido Transit Center in the morning. Then for the morning rush hour, you could send them back, bouncing back and forth between Escondido and Oceanside. And I've actually designed this layout to have alternatingly 2 or 3 trains running at any given time. If you have 2 trains running, like you see here, they depart Escondido and Oceanside at the same time, and they meet in the exact middle of the double track segment. But if you're running 3 train operations, they can alternate departing between Escondido and Oceanside, and they alternate meeting at the beginning or the end of the double track segment. And this is in addition to trains that are laying over at the end of the line. So in theory, you could have 1 train at each end of the line and 3 operating at any given moment to occupy up to 5 operators on this otherwise fairly small layout. Then after morning rush hour, you could take a DMU off the main line and store it in the operations and maintenance facility, replicating a reduction in service during non-peak hours, but the DMUs could continue to bounce back and forth. Then you could take a freight train out of staging, tuck it away on the freight bypass branch, and wait for a moment in between DMUs to take all the way to the end of the line, the Escondido switching puzzle, where it can then merrily switch away over the course of the afternoon, all of the different industry spurs, while the DMUs continue to cycle back and forth along the length of the route. Then in the afternoon, when the freight train is finished switching, you can send it back out onto the main line where it can switch all of the industry spurs accessible there, and then it goes back to staging. And this, of course, can happen again while the DMUs continue to cycle, and then maybe you can model the evening rush hour as well. Now, a really fun feature of this layout, like I alluded to earlier, is the fact that you have the autonomously orbiting mainline loops going in and out of staging. And this allows you to have, say, a Surfliner, a Metrolink, a coaster, or any number of through freights just going around in circles, hinting at a much interesting and larger high iron drama just beyond. If you're building this layout for younglings, you could maybe teach them to dance the Sprinter Shuffle while you run a freight train around them. If you are building this layout for oldlings, you can maybe have 2 freight trains per op session, 1 each per operator, and then the quote-unquote off-duty operator is responsible for operating the DMUs. And then maybe, of course, you could also have 2-man crews, again, necessitating more operators. And if you are an insaneling, you can fully automate the DMU system while you only run freight trains, but that is well beyond the scope of presentation. So what can we learn from this layout? Firstly, I think that the constant parade of DMUs adds a degree of prototypical bustle and gravitas to an otherwise very small 12 by 13 foot layout. It's often been said that passenger trains are used to throw a wrench in the plans of a dispatcher, but since DMUs have such a high frequency, I say that they lob full toolboxes. But I would also caution you against making this layout too big, as in its current form, it justifies a mere 1 or 2 freight trains a day. And if you were to expand it, you would only add intermediate DMU stations and maybe 1 or 2 extra freight spurs. And so if you make this layout too big, you run the risk of recruiting a fleet of volunteer hobbyist bus drivers only to interest 1 dispatcher and 1 freight train operator at a time. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a dead-end branch line, so it can only justify a certain number of trains. So this naturally begs the question, can we make DMUs into a bigger, busier layout? And also a corollary of this, for looking at the River Line, I want to make the point that it isn't only a West Coast phenomenon. It is also applicable to other regions of the country as well. So the River Line itself, again, opened in 2004. It's 55 kilometers long, has 21 stations, and an hour and 7-minute runtime end to end. It is also similarly about 50% double tracked, and it operates with 20 Stadler GTWs, usually operating in single vehicle trains. And it operates along the ex-Pennsylvania Railroad Bordentown-Trenton branch, which began service in 1834 and lost passenger service in 1963. So even though it's fairly light ridership as far as rail-based transit systems go, the River Line is still incredibly successful, in part because it's multipolar. It has major destinations on both ends of its line. On the northern end, it has Trenton Transit Center, which serves downtown Trenton and the New Jersey state capital. It also offers transfers to Amtrak, SEPTA to downtown Philadelphia, and New Jersey Transit Commuter Rail to New York City and Princeton. And then on the southern end, it goes to Camden, New Jersey, where it offers transfers to downtown Philadelphia and a major event center. It is so successful that they're in the process of building a whole second line, the Glassboro-Camden line, which is almost entirely a new service to southern neighborhoods, primarily to Rowan University, if you're starting to notice a theme here. And overall, the River Line is the absolute darling of YouTube urbanists, like one of my favorite, Alan Fisher, and his video, Suburbs That Don't Suck. The River Line makes many repeat appearances throughout his videos while he's trying to point out that you can have intersuburban rail transit that is useful and meaningful to residents, in addition to being frequent. All right, looking at the line a little bit closer, it has a small branch in the north to Trenton. There's a small 2-track satellite operations and maintenance facility capable of hosting 6 vehicles. This allows you to run trains earlier in the morning with multiple operations and maintenance facilities because you don't need to wait for the DMUs to diffuse along the entire length of the line from one central point. Then it splits away from the original freight rail line, but based on this picture, I'll let you decide whether or not it sees active freight service. And then it goes through a series of flange-squealingly tight curves near a highway off-ramp and a bridge to go right next to the northeast corridor, where, like I mentioned, it serves Trenton Transit Center quite frequently. The southern branch also has kind of another branch away from the freight rail line, which is a little bit more light rail-like, primarily because, as you see here, it shares street running with automobiles in mixed traffic. And then it also offers a transfer at the Walter Rand Transportation Center to the Patco high-speed line to downtown Philadelphia. And then the end of the line itself serves the Waterfront Entertainment Center, which has the large Camden Aquarium, the Battleship New Jersey, which you can just barely see right here, and then also a medium-sized baseball stadium just out of view to the south. Actually, the end of the line, they've done something very interesting where they have extra spur capacity to muzzle load a bunch of vehicles in order to deal with the very large crowds after a baseball game. So it's just an interesting little thing there. But of course, the main reason why we care about the River Line is because there's a lot more freight integration. The northern, about half, actually shares the same rails as a lighter use freight branch line, and the southern quarter to a third runs on its own rails side by side with the heavy double track, or in some cases triple track, main line. Also on the southern branch, it runs through the Conrail Shared Assets Operations, or CSAO's Pavonia Yard near Camden, which is not the most photogenic yard I've ever found, so it was very difficult to get pictures of it off the internet. But you can see here there are freight cars in the background of a fairly large yard, and there's also another train going through the yard here as well. It's fairly similar to the Sprinter in that it has alternating segments of single and double track and half-hourly headways timed to maximize the use of the double track segments that they have, and also most most of its right of way is fully cleared. Not all. It would require some larger projects in order to get rid of some bottlenecks, but most of it is capable of being double tracked today, just so long as they had the money. But it is fairly different from the Sprinter in that, among other things, it has simple platforms, no gauntlets or bridges from the platform. And so I don't know exactly why this is the case. Maybe it's because the vehicles are larger than the ones used in the Sprinter, or maybe they have an industry atypically large gap between the vehicle and the platform. Somebody would have to give it a walking audit to figure out what's going on. And it's also different from the Sprinter in that there is much more freight. Not only is there the yard and several major industrial switching areas along the line, there are also not just local freight trains, but also through freights as well. So there's a lot more busyness and intrigue going on. And so, as such, I think the River Line is a better candidate for a more traditional freight-oriented railroad, which I, again, made here for a 12 by 13-foot space. Starting our tour, this layout is another victim of my wraparound hidden staging concept, so sorry about that. But coming out of staging, it splits into the River Line and Conrail shared assets, where it then enters what I'm calling Punivonia Yard, where I have aggressively compressed the prototypical 46 tracks to a mere 3. But don't worry, all is not lost. There actually is another prototype yard a little bit to the north, out of order. That is, in fact, only 3 tracks big. So it's not like I'm completely abandoning precedent, but I'm calling it Pavonia, or I guess Punivonia, because this allows us to keep an engine facility here, which is always a fun and interesting feature to model. And then also coming out of the yard, there's a prolonged segment of double track, which can serve as the yard lead for a switcher. Then in the foreground is the Riverline OMF itself, which is similarly massively compressed, having only a single outdoor storage track and a small 2-bay maintenance building. Outside of the OMF, there is a small operator exchange gate, which is actually how they do shift changes in the middle of the day. So it's always interesting to have things like these to be another consideration for the dispatcher when vehicles need to stop on the main and hold it for a period of time. But overall, this entire yard scene is meant less to be prototypical and more to be layout sized, because you don't want to massive layout in a mere 12 by 13 foot space. If you wanted to expand the railroad and make it larger, a very obvious candidate would be to make the yards larger and to have bigger staging yards where you could focus on trains coming from staging, being switched in the yard, and then being sent back out to staging again, in addition to all the stuff that we're showing you here. But the main reason why the yards are so small is because I'm too lazy to draw out that many tracks, let's be honest. But the rest of the layout is almost entirely track by track prototypical. Everything between 36th Street Station and Route 73 Pennsauken is what you will see in the real world, except, of course, for one track that I tried. But as hard as I tried, I could not find a way to fit it into the layout. So there still has been some tiny amount of compression, but what can you do? You can't win everything. Anyway, coming out of the yard, there is a 36th Street Station on another room exit lift bridge, and then a brief and mostly prototypical segment of a quadruple track. Where you have 2 tracks for the freight trains and 2 tracks for the River Line. And this goes into Pennsauken Junction, which is a large Y that allows the freight trains to access any segments of the main line. Obviously here, it's just a dummy Y. But interestingly, the River Line, it doesn't need to access the Y. So it actually has a diamond bypass of the Y where it scoots underneath the bridge in order to get to Pennsauken Junction Station, where it offers a vertical transfer to the Atlantic City line, offering connections between its titular city and Philadelphia downtown 30th Street Station. Then continuing from the station is what I'm calling the Pennsauken Switching District, which is a short branch line that heads away from the main line to serve Pennsauken Packing Company, Dow Chemical by the large water tower, or I don't know, maybe it's a chemical tower, and then KSI Auto Parts over here. Closer to the main line, there's a standard warehousing and distribution next to this interesting little thing coming out the other side of the building, but it has 1 track inside the building, 1 track outside. Then heading into Route 73 Pennsauken Station, I've taken Pioneer Warehousing and made it a backdrop flat in the corner. And then next to the station, there is this very weird place called Next Generation Recycling, which has a peculiar tail trackless runaround here. Now, I don't know if that's because they have maybe a trackmobile and they don't need a tail track because it can just put down its wheels and go on the road, or maybe this was an old track alignment that was used for something else and they just simply decided to take it over because that's what they had access to. But otherwise, it's a very interesting, I think it's mostly a scrapyard. Now, the most important part of this switching area here is that there's a prototypical crossover right right after the switching district and before the station. And this obviously gives the River Line the ability to access both platforms in both directions, but more importantly, it frees up a segment of main line right here for a switching locomotive to use, both as a tail track and also as a spare storage track for a bunch of other cars as it proceeds to switch the switching district. So that's really important here. Then heading back into staging, you could have maybe some scenic elements on the backdrop, like views of downtown Philadelphia, or maybe views of the namesake Delaware River. Or if you had more space, you could maybe model some of these pseudo near street running center median road segments that the River Line has multiple of. But for now, I've also included a staging bypass track, which allows you to continuously orbit a DMU on the visible portions of the layout rather than going into staging. But actually, on that note, with very minor modifications, if you just had a dedicated track for the DMU going into staging, like so, and then also maybe if you took one of the legs of the Pennsauken Junction Y and turned that into an alternate staging access track for the freight trains, you actually would create two entirely independent loops of track, one of them for through freight trains, and then one of them for the DMUs. And this would allow you to autonomously orbit two trains while you go and do something in the yard or the switching district, which is an optimal idea for a lone wolf modeler. And again, allows you to replicate a high iron drama with very little effort. All right, so now that we've finished the tour of the layout, what would an operating session look like? Well, similarly to the Sprinter, you would have the morning rush hour taking DMUs out of the operations and maintenance facility and then orbiting them back and forth between Trenton and Camden. And then you would also, after that, you could have a through freight come and drop off some cars into the yard for switching. Then you could grab a locomotive from the engine house and switch the yard, and then also maybe the pseudo dummy interchange tracks of the Y. And then you could send it out onto the main line to the Pennsauken switching district, where it could switch all of the industry spurs along the way before itself heading back into staging. And this, of course, could all happen both while DMUs continue to orbit the inner loop and through freight orbits the outer loop. So what can we learn from this layout? Well, first off, I think that even freight-focused layouts can benefit from DMUs, because if you just delete the River Line segments, this layout actually looks like a fairly normal small shelf switching layout. I also think that having more separation between freight trains and DMUs allows for this more semi-autonomous circulation, which again, it's not too difficult to fully automate, either by having a dedicated double track line for the DMU, or maybe by some fancy programming with signaling or decoder recordings or something. I think this also shows us that DMUs have a place on even larger layouts as well. For example, you could use DMUs kind of as a style of quote unquote urban scenery to designate to other operators when they are leaving the high iron and when they are entering the metropolitan area, even though it may not be overwhelmingly distinct from the rest of the layout in the modeled form. This also might be able to justify multiple dispatchers. Since DMUs have such high activity in such a small area, you could maybe have one dispatcher only for the DMU territory, responsible for coordinating the passenger vehicles and also any freight trains that come on the line at the same time, and then a dispatcher for the entire rest of the layout. And the two dispatchers would have to coordinate between each other for passing off freight trains going between the territory. All right, now as we start to enter into the conclusions, you might be wondering, how does this apply to you? You might be thinking to yourself, these are all interesting ideas, but it's not what I'm modeling. And what I want you to take home is that it could be what you're modeling with much less effort than you think. So just like the real world DMUs, model DMUs, my point is that they are a very infrastructure light form of rapid frequent transit. So you don't have to modify existing layouts too much. And I want to demonstrate this here with the Milwaukee, Racine, and Troy club layout of the Model Railroader magazine, Kalmbach Publishing in Wisconsin. So I think this is very representative of two different styles of layout. Both in the main central portion here, this is a very big mainline style layout with very large staging yards, but also up here in the corner, the Wisconsin and Southern branch, the Worcester branch. This is very representative of a lot of small, narrow switching layouts that are becoming increasingly popular in the hobby. So this right here is what a lot of people are working with in some form or another. And I think that you can actually bring DMUs to a layout like this. For example, you could have maybe a system running out of a Milwaukee Amtrak station. Maybe there's a small operations and maintenance facility right here near the engine house. And then it has a few stations throughout the suburbs before it seeds the rest of the layout to the main line trains. But alternatively, you could have another line here. Maybe there's a station here in Williams Bay, and again, a small operations and maintenance facility, and then a station or two on the switching layout. And if you're modeling only the switching layout, well, maybe the other end of the line could be modeled in staging right here. And not only is this a simple and easy modification modification to make to existing model railroads, it has a basis in prototype. As we have seen here, they exist. The river line, the sprinter up here, the branch line sprinter, and then the main line river line. There is a prototypical precedent for lines like this. So I also want to end on a little bit more of a philosophical note. In this case, everybody has heard of proto-freelancing, right? This is basically modeling a railroad that could have been, but didn't. And famous examples of this include the Virginian in Ohio, or the Allegheny Midland, or the Maumee route. But it's surprising to me how there are always railroads in the past, and much less often railroads in the present, or even other options. And so my thought is, why not model something that still could be built to varying degrees of likelihood? And I'm not talking about like modeling the future like rocket powered trains or moon railroads or anything like that. Instead, I'm talking about modeling any of the proposed or under construction systems that we've already seen in this presentation, that already have a real world precedent for at least consideration, if not eventual construction. And so this proto-futuring is, I think, particularly important to DMUs, because if you take every mode of rail-based transit system and plot its mileage as a function of age, the older a technology, the more miles and prototypes you have to model of it. And this is true even if you delete the historic streetcar aberration of a whopping 18,000 kilometers nationwide. It's still a pretty linear increase. So DMUs, though, they are the youngest technology, and thus they have the fewest prototypes and the least ready-to-run models available. Thus, if you wanted to model a DMU, you would have to make the most concessions in order to have a prototypical advance the DMUs to an older age along this line, you then have more miles to choose from and more prototypes to choose from as well, hopefully meaning that you would have to make fewer compromises in order to have a prototype-based layout. And so this is kind of what I'm calling proto-freelancing in the wrong direction. And I could see several different ways of going about it. The first one would be to build a very real but unbuilt project, like I kind of just described. You could also maybe model an existing system, but tweak it to make it a little bit more easily modelable, just a little bit. Or you could maybe model something much less likely. So to the first option, as you've seen, State Department of Transportations usually have freely accessible document archives where they have studies and plans and proposals and environmental analyses, all usually with maps and routes, detailed blueprints and plans of corridors that you could use. Basically, it's your prototype modeling the future. They've already done all the research for you. So you could maybe model these to model a system that is, say, about 5 to 15-ish or so years in the future. The second option is to tweak an existing system, and this obviously comes from the fact that there's a dearth of ready-to-run DMU models, basically only Pico's Sprinter Desiro. So instead, maybe you could use the Desiro on an otherwise fully prototypical layout. And actually, while I was researching this presentation, I found that somebody else had the same idea. I think Connecticut Train Guy 52 in Train Z Simulator. He took a model of a digital model of the Desiro DMU, and he reskinned it for the New Jersey Transit River Line. And this actually has at least some sort of basis in prototype. Passenger vehicles are very high speed and beaten into the ground with their frequent use, so they have only about 20 to 25 or so year lifespans. So the Sprinter, or sorry, the River Line being almost 20 years old, it's starting to come up onto the point where it needs to buy replacement vehicles. And you could say to yourself, maybe in the future, Siemens won the bid for the replacement vehicles, and so you would basically be modeling the River Line with these Desiro Sprinter DMUs from Pico. And this massively simplifies rolling stock acquisition to simply repainting existing models rather than fully rebuilding them or making bespoke scratch-built models. And importantly, it lowers the barrier to entry to otherwise fully prototypical modeling. The only thing that would be different would be the vehicles, and everything else could exist fully in reality. Another example of how you could tweak an existing system, on the River Line, there's this very large abandoned hulk of a building. I think it used to be some sort of a watch factory, and as it is right now, it's completely abandoned. But there are plans to actually do transit-oriented development of this in the future, to turn it into a bunch of hipster artist lofts with a bunch of interesting restaurants and shops on the ground level. So you could model the River Line as it is right now, and you could faithfully model this empty abandoned hulk, or you could model something that is less depressing and just pretend it's a few years in the future and that the transit-oriented development has already happened. And that would be a lot more interesting and fun and happy rather than, well, that. And then the third option is to model something less likely. And this could be a little bit further into the future. And maybe there's less political will for this idea, maybe because it's very expensive or requires massive amounts of demolition, but it would still be a good idea for regional transit. And you could be really fancy about this. You could maybe evaluate evaluate 40-year predicted growth patterns and identify new high capacity, high use corridors, and then model that, basically actually prototype modeling the future. Or you could just use this as an excuse to bring DMU choo-choos to your already built other choo-choo layout. And I won't judge. But the overarching theme between these three ideas for modeling the near future is to just be near future enough that the only functional change to the layout is that there are more electric vehicles on the road, and that otherwise it operates effectively as a present day layout, just as better justification for bringing transit to it. All right, so in summation, a modern DMU transit is an exciting and growing aspect of modern cities that utilizes existing urban freight switching corridors. It is easily modelable because it is tightly associated with things that people already model, and recent product offerings now make it possible to model. And you could use modeling the near future to justify modeling it either by building a real system which hasn't been built yet, or by modeling an existing prototype but more easily, or you could just simply use it as an excuse to graft DMUs onto your already built layout. Now, as far as takeaways for this presentation go, I want you to go out and buy DMU models, keep the manufacturers manufacturing, hopefully show them that there's a market for this type of vehicle, and then maybe someday in the future they will come out with additional prototypes for other DMU lines, thus making it easier for people to fully prototypically model them. Maybe you can also bring DMUs to your existing layout, or if you're really fancy, you can make a bespoke layout centered around one of the DMU prototypes, kind of like what I've depicted here in the track plans. I also don't just want you to bring DMUs to your layouts, I want you to bring them to your communities. So vote in favor of politicians that support rail-based transit services. And then finally, I hope that this allows people to recognize and appreciate the present-day transit vehicle operators in the same way that steam locomotive engineers were venerated in the days of yore. So thank you very much. Do I have any questions?
Wow, that was
that
something.
Is the second time I have gotten that reaction.
Well, we do have some questions for you here. Could this be a solution for smaller cities to implement more commuter-based transit lines?
Oh, absolutely. Basically, anywhere that a city has a small or underutilized urban freight rail switching line, just imagine dropping a few thousand cubic yards of concrete next to it, painting a yellow strip, and then running the vehicles. It is a very infrastructure-light mode of transit, which does not require the rebuilding of roadways or expensive tunneling or viaduct projects. Now, that also is kind of a flaw, too. It means that you're not going to get a truly high-quality rail system like you would find in some major cities with very frequent or very high capacity trains. And also sometimes it means that the old-fashioned rail lines don't go nearby to where the current demand is. But overall, especially for smaller cities, yes, it is something that seriously should be on the table and should be viewed a lot more frequently than bus rapid transit, which is just often buses with a fancy paint job.
That is very true. What are the typical speeds of these systems?
I don't think any in North America run more than 60 miles an hour. And I don't know if that's because it's a vehicle limitation. It's probably more likely track limitations, like the linearity of the corridor. But since they usually run kind of more in denser cities, and they're not meant to be the long distance haul routes like true commuter trains, the speeds are less important than things like routing and double tracking to allow good frequencies and headways.
Are you aware of DMUs in other modeling scales?
Yes. So one of the pictures of the DMU models that I put up there, I probably should have highlighted it, is actually in N scale. And I think that's the one made by Pico. So I think it does come in DCC and maybe Sound too. And especially if you go to like the fully European models, there's a wealth of DMUs in N scale. And I think maybe a few in Z scale. Obviously, they're not in S scale because neither is anything else. And I don't think there are any in O scale either. But it's primarily N and HO.
Have you had a chance to go on Europe's extensive passenger rail systems? And I also want to add the Netherlands.
I am this close to doing a postdoc in Germany or Switzerland and never coming back. My sister went to graduate school in Zurich, Switzerland. I went to graduate school in central Pennsylvania. I think I'm moving the wrong direction in my life. So yes, I have like a 50-odd day streak on Duolingo for German, and I may just completely abandon the suburbs of American sprawl forever and never return.
I wouldn't blame you. What software did you use to make this amazing presentation?
PowerPoint. If you're asking for software for the track plans, that's a Rail Modeler Pro. I think that's the one that's available on Mac. But it took a very long time to make this presentation. Almost a full semester, I took time off of modeling my own railroad, and instead I became a recreational PowerPointician, doing the aggressive amounts of animation and searching endlessly for the right picture on the internet. Which, by the way, all of the images are lovingly plagiarized without credit.
Might be a little bit off topic. What type of bike do you ride?
I ride a Trek Dual Sport Plus, which was their first type of e-bike. In fact, the bicycle, my bicycle was fairly old. I needed a new one, and I tried like 24 different bicycles, but none of them were as good as the Trek Dual Sport, which I started with. And then I found the Dual Sport Plus, which I think has been rebranded under a different name now. This was the first year that e-bikes were a big thing. I think it was 2018, and they had outsold themselves their estimations by 6,000%. So my bike was only one of 2 left in the entire country, an extra small bicycle frame in Massachusetts, and an extra large bicycle frame, which is what I needed because I'm a giant, in Santa Monica. And they had it shipped here to central Pennsylvania, and I fell in love with it, not because it was an e-bike, but because with the e-bike power off, it was still the best bicycle of the 2 dozen that I tried trying to find a new bicycle. And if you're asking about the motorcycle, it's a Yamaha 900cc touring bicycle, the Tracer, I believe.
And there's a question here: how did you make the trains move on the slides? I'm assuming just aggressive amounts of PowerPoint animation.
Yes. I think the final document is just a hair over a gigabyte, and that's not just the pictures, that's the sheer amount of animations and transitions. And unfortunately, you guys didn't get the full experience because I understand there's an internet lag for NMRAx. But rest assured, if you ever see it in person, I think I actually have to give like a seizure warning or an epilepsy warning at the beginning of the presentation because of all of the movement and flashing lights and pictures.
And I think that's all the questions here. I'm a fellow person from Washington State, so.
Ooh, where do you live?
The San Juan Islands, but I think it's raining right now, so you should feel a little bit more at home.
It's raining here in Pennsylvania as well. I like these overcast days.
Well, with that, I think that wraps up this NMRAx clinic. If you want to talk to some of our clinicians, make sure to go to werribee.com/OMRG.
All right. Thank you very much, Jacob. It was a genuine pleasure talking with you.
Same here. Oh, and our next NMRAx will be on April 22nd. So put it on your calendars.